Hi guys. Tonight we are not in your cozy, centrally heated bedroom. Instead, you are standing inside the echoing corridors of a medieval castle. The walls around you are made of stone, thick, grey, and unyielding. At first glance they look majestic, almost reassuring, but lean closer, and you feel the chill seeping into your bones. Each block of granite acts like an icy sponge, drinking in the warmth of any fire and holding on to cold like a jealous dragon. You tug your cloak a little tighter, because let's be honest, without modern insulation you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, post your location and the local time in the comments. I'm always curious who's tuning in from which part of the world. Now, dim the lights. You trudge along the passageway, your footsteps muffled by rushes scattered across the floor. They do little to soften the cold. The air here tastes of smoke and damp lime. Torches flicker, but their flames hardly cut the gloom. In a storm, the wind forces itself through arrow slits and gaps in the wooden shutters. The castle is a fortress, yes, but not against winter. Against a blizzard, it feels more like a vast icebox. Nobles might boast of their thick walls and lofty towers, but those very features make heating a nightmare. A mainstream fact: the average medieval fireplace could only warm a radius of a few feet, leaving the rest of the hall bitterly cold. And while today we talk about energy efficiency, back then efficiency was measured by how many logs you could spare before the stores ran out. Quirky details emerge too. In some records, travelers noted how residents hung strips of salted meat directly above the hearth, not only for convenience, but because the constant heat prevented the cuts from freezing solid. So you might find yourself drifting to sleep with the scent of smoked pork hanging over your head. Odd, perhaps, but practical. Historians still argue whether castle builders truly underestimated the cold when designing these strongholds, or if they deliberately prioritized military strength over comfort. Some scholars claim the harshness of the stone halls was accepted as a badge of resilience, while others suggest that later renovations, like adding chimneys and wall hangings, prove that medieval people were simply desperate to correct architectural oversights. As you wander deeper into the keep, you hear the moan of wind rushing through cracks where the mason's mortar has crumbled. Every corner becomes a miniature whistle. Imagine trying to sleep with those ghostly notes singing through the night. You might roll over, pressing your cloak to your ears, but the music of the storm seeps in regardless. Your breath fogs before your face. At night, without bustling servants and roaring fires, temperatures inside can sink nearly as low as outside. This explains why most people did not drift through hallways after dark. They clung instead to whichever chamber offered the faintest promise of warmth. You might envy the great hall's hearth, yet even there, flames lick upward while your back tingles from the draught behind. To survive such nights, medieval households relied on sheer adaptation. You imagine the sound of heavy doors being barred, straw stuffed along thresholds to plug the gaps. Children whimper as their mothers herd them beneath woolen blankets. A guard stomps his boots, shaking snow onto the flagstones before collapsing beside the fire, grateful just to be inside the fortress rather than on the ramparts. Even here in section 1 of our story, you realize survival is not about luxury. It is about layers, numbers, and ingenuity. Stone walls may keep enemies out, but they let the cold in. The night stretches long. The blizzard howls against the towers. And you, wrapped in scratchy fabric and breathing shallow, must convince yourself that morning will eventually come. You step off the draughty stair and push open a heavy oaken door bound in iron. The hinges groan, but inside you find a quieter world. The Lord's solar, the private chamber, set aside for warmth, rest, and something resembling comfort. Compared to the echoing great hall, this room feels smaller, more intimate, and at least by medieval standards luxurious. The walls are still stone, of course, but here they are, plastered and occasionally painted, their chill softened by thick tapestries. The flicker of a brazier in the corner sends shadows tumbling up the walls, and for the first time all evening, you sense the possibility of warmth. This solar is where the Lord and his close family might withdraw on stormy nights, seeking to escape the frigid breath of the blizzard. A mainstream historical fact. Many medieval castles eventually added solars specifically to provide a warmer, private alternative to the vast communal great hall. They often sat on upper floors where sunlight, if any managed to shine, could seep through small glazed windows, rare luxuries at the time. Yet even with the brazier glowing and the windows shuttered, you can still feel a draught curling across the floor like a sly serpent. The furniture here helps. A heavy bed, draped with woolen blankets, sits against the wall, its posts rising toward the ceiling. Chairs are padded with cushions stuffed with feathers or wool. A wooden chest rests by the bed, perhaps containing more blankets, or even fur cloaks brought in from the hunting grounds. Still, you shiver, because while the brazier burns, the smoke has to curl up a hole in the ceiling, and some of it inevitably drifts back, filling the chamber with an acrid tang. Imagine falling asleep with your eyes watering, nose smarting, yet grateful that the sting of smoke at least means the fire is burning. Quirky details emerge in such spaces. There are accounts of nobles keeping small, portable stoves, little clay or metal pots filled with hot embers that they carried into their bedchambers. One could be placed beneath a stool, another under the bed, though the risk of fire was ever present. Picture the Lord shifting nervously, hoping the glowing pot beneath him warms without setting the rushes alight. More unusual still, some records suggest that wealthy households placed heated bricks, wrapped in cloth, at the foot of their beds. Your toes might sigh with relief, but your imagination stirs uneasily, wondering if the cloth smoulders in the night. Historians still debate how effective these private chambers truly were. Some argue that the solar was a genuine improvement, offering a sanctuary from the worst of the cold, while others believe it was largely symbolic, more about showing status than achieving real warmth. After all, stone is stone, and heat escapes faster than it can be trapped. Was the solar a comfort, or simply the illusion of one? Scholars disagree, but standing here with your teeth chattering, you might lean toward the latter. In the solar, the sensory experience sharpens. The brazier crackles, faintly spitting as damp logs give off steam. The air tastes metallic, tinged with iron from the poker resting in the embers. The rush mat beneath your feet emits a grassy, almost sweet smell, though hints of last week's spilled ale linger. Draperies hang along the wall, embroidered with scenes of hunting stags or charging knights, but they are more than decoration. They serve as insulation, thin shields against the relentless stone. Run your fingers along the fabric and you'll feel the chill trapped behind, as though the wall itself is a sleeping giant breathing frost into the room. You imagine the Lord himself retreating here on a winter's night, slipping off his fur-lined cloak and lowering himself onto the bed. His boots thunk against the floorboards. A servant hurries to pour him a cup of warmed wine, spiced with cloves and honey, for even the wealthiest knew that a hot drink before sleep was a simple balm against the cold. A cat may leap onto the chest by the bed, curling into a circle of fur, while a dog snuffles contentedly at the foot. These companions add heat, but also a sense of companionship when the blizzard rattles the shutters like skeletal fingers. The solar represents privilege. Not every castle resident sees its warmth. Servants and guards linger outside in darker halls, their breath misting in the torchlight, while only a select few enjoy this chamber's meagre comforts. You might envy them, but then you notice how the draught under the door still creeps across the Lord's toes, how the brazier sputters when the wind howls, how his lady still pulls her fur robe tighter, despite the cushions and tapestries. Even the powerful cannot escape the season. One mainstream example from history, at Kenilworth Castle in England, records describe the solar as a place where the Lord's family might dine separately during winter, seeking warmth away from the cavernous hall. Yet even there, fires could not erase the reality of medieval cold. Servants carried steaming dishes across icy floors, hoping the food did not freeze before it reached the table. A quirky footnote comes from a French manuscript describing how some lords hung entire animal pelts on their solar walls: wolf skins, bear hides, even the occasional lynx. Not only did this insulate the chamber, it served as proof of hunting prowess. Imagine drifting to sleep beneath the glassy stare of a wolf hide pinned above your head. Comforting or disquieting? Perhaps both. You wonder, did these solars truly help people survive the blizzards, or did they merely shift the struggle to a smaller arena? Historians still argue whether their construction marked a real architectural evolution or simply a social one. Were they about warmth, or about separation, drawing a line between those who had access to heated chambers and those who shivered elsewhere? The evidence bends both ways, and as you stand in the room, listening to the storm battering the shutters, you cannot help but feel the thinness of the veil between security and hardship. The blizzard outside roars on, snow pelts the narrow window, and the wooden frame shudders. Inside, the brazier flares, momentarily brightening the embroidered figures on the tapestry. You see the stitched deer leap as though alive, the hounds straining at invisible leashes, and then the flame subsides, shadows swallowing them whole. In that ebb of light, the chamber becomes less a sanctuary and more a reminder. Comfort here is fragile, conditional, temporary. You pull your cloak close once more, brushing past the heavy curtains of the bed. They swing slightly, their folds smelling faintly of lanolin and lavender. Within, the air feels trapped, warmer than outside, though still far from cozy. It is a trick of architecture, of fabric and fire, of people's desperate attempts to carve a pocket of warmth from the glacial grip of the castle. As you lower yourself onto the edge of the mattress, the straw beneath the linen rustles softly, and for a fleeting moment, you almost believe you are safe from the blizzard's rage. Almost. You leave the Lord's solar and wander back toward the great hall, where the vast space swallows you up. The fire here, once lively, has begun to sink into glowing embers. Shadows sprawl across the rafters, and the sound of the storm outside is muffled by the sheer thickness of the stone walls. Yet for all its grandeur, the great hall offers little in the way of true comfort. This is where many of the household's servants and retainers spend their nights, rolled in cloaks or lying side by side, clinging to whatever warmth they can find. The great hall was the beating heart of castle life, and not only during feasts or ceremonies. Historical records describe how, at night, retainers and lower-ranking servants spread across the floor in rough bedding of straw or rushes. You can picture them curled up near the hearth, jockeying for the best position, while others resigned themselves to draughts creeping through the farthest corners. It was a scene of hierarchy even in sleep. The closer you were to the fire, the higher your standing, or simply the quicker you moved when embers began to fade. One curious practice emerges here. Some households kept a single candle burning throughout the night, not for light but to provide a sense of security and continuity. It wasn't enough to illuminate the hall. Instead, it glowed faintly, like a star in a cavernous sky. Servants would roll over in the night, glimpse that fragile flame, and feel reassured they had not been abandoned to darkness. Imagine lying on your back, eyes heavy, tracing smoke curling toward the beams, soot drifting gently like snow indoors. The question of how tolerable this sleeping arrangement was remains unsettled among scholars. Some argue that human bodies pressed together under shared blankets produced a surprising amount of heat, making the communal hall bearable even during the worst winters. Others suggest the cold was unrelenting, and that servants endured nights so frigid they barely rested. The evidence is contradictory. One traveller's diary paints the hall as cozy and bustling, while another complains of breath freezing on mustaches before dawn. Your senses fill with the experience. You hear muffled coughs as someone shifts beneath a rough woolen cloak. A guard snores nearby, boots still on, his sword within reach. The hall smells of smoke and mead, of salted meat hanging high in the rafters, and of the faint ammonia of rushes that have not been changed in weeks. The floor beneath you is uneven, packed dirt under scattered reeds. You shift for comfort, pulling your own cloak tighter, but no position seems to soften the hardness. The retainers whisper among themselves before drifting off, voices low so as not to wake their superiors. Perhaps they joke about the snow piling up outside, or about a hare they spotted that morning. Perhaps they grumble about whose turn it will be to rise early and stoke the fire. These little exchanges carry warmth of their own, the comfort of routine and companionship in a life full of cold uncertainties. Archaeological evidence confirms that fires in great halls often burned continuously through the night. Servants were tasked with feeding logs into the flames until dawn. This wasn't just about heat, it was also about protection. A smouldering hearth could easily spark a blaze, and having someone awake to watch it was a safeguard against catastrophe. Picture a weary servant nodding off, only to jolt awake when sparks snap against the stones, reminding him that vigilance is the price of survival. One odd habit surfaces in chronicles from Northern Europe. Some households kept large dogs inside the hall, specifically to lie among the servants, sharing their body heat. These dogs were not just companions but living heaters, prized for their ability to curl up against cold bodies through the night. You imagine the comfort of a furry flank pressed against your side as the wind whistles through unseen cracks. There's still disagreement among experts about whether these communal sleeping arrangements fostered true rest. Was it easy to sleep amid the snoring, coughing, and shifting of dozens of bodies? Or was the hall more a place of restless dozing, where exhaustion forced people under whether or not comfort was possible? The evidence is fragmentary, but the question lingers. Perhaps both were true, depending on the severity of the winter and the resilience of the sleeper. You close your eyes and let the sensations wash over you. The crackle of the fire, the low hum of voices fading into silence, the sharp bite of cold on your exposed nose, the tickle of rushes under your cheek. Sleep here is not luxury, it is survival. Each body adds to the heat of the next. Each blanket is pulled a little tighter. Each dream is shaped by the howl of the storm outside. And as you drift towards slumber among servants and guards, you realize that in a medieval castle, comfort was never guaranteed, only borrowed in fleeting moments before the cold returned to claim its share. The fire in the great hall dwindles further as you rise and step into one of the side corridors. Your boots crunch softly on the rushes scattered across the stone floor. At first glance, they seem like little more than a messy carpet of straw and reeds, but those rushes are part of an entire medieval system of survival. You bend down, touch them, and feel their dampness. They are replaced only a few times a year in many castles, with new layers spread directly over the old, creating a patchwork of grass, herbs, dirt, and whatever else the household had underfoot. Why did they use them? Partly for comfort, partly for warmth. Contemporary records mention that rushes helped insulate the floor, which otherwise would have been bare, stone-cold as ice and unforgiving. Walking barefoot across stone in winter would leach heat from your body in seconds, so even a thin layer of plant matter provided a buffer. And as you walk over them, the sound is soft and rustling, far less echoing than bootsteps on bare rock. Some castle inventories reveal curious habits. Herbs such as lavender, thyme, or rosemary were often mixed into the rushes. The fragrant plants masked the smell of damp straw and rotting food scraps that inevitably fell to the floor. For a brief moment, imagine the mingling aromas, the sweetness of lavender crushed beneath your heel, the earthy musk of dried reeds, the sour note of spilled ale, and the unmistakable tang of smoke drifting down from torches. This was the smellscape of medieval winter nights. Not everyone agrees on just how useful those rushes were. Some researchers insist they offered real insulation and comfort, while others argue that the constant dampness only made rooms colder and more unhealthy. After all, layers of decomposing rushes harbored insects, mold, and fleas. Did they trap warmth or disease? Evidence points both ways, and the truth may depend on the care of the household. In a well-managed castle, rushes might indeed have been refreshed often and sprinkled with herbs. In a poorer or neglected one, they might have turned into fetid mulch that chilled sleepers more than it protected them. You take a few steps further into the corridor, hearing your boots scuff across the rushes. The sound is gentle, like a whisper, as though the castle itself breathes with each step. A servant darts past you, carrying an armful of fresh reeds, his arms trembling under the load. He will scatter them near the hearth, where people lie close to the fire, giving them at least the illusion of fresh bedding. There is an odd story in a 14th century account of a feast where noble guests complained about the rushes being so thick that their boots sank ankle deep. Apparently, the steward had overdone it, trying to impress with abundance. Guests tripped, servants stumbled, and laughter rang through the hall. It's a small reminder that even practical things could become ridiculous when pride entered the picture. As you picture yourself lying on the rush-strewn floor, you realize how little separates you from the raw earth. There's a faint scent of mildew rising from beneath, where older layers have begun to rot. Your cheek brushes the rough stems, scratching slightly, but it's still better than resting directly on stone that radiates cold. In the silence of the night, those who slept here would have shifted, rolled, pulled cloaks tighter, and prayed their place near the hearth would be enough to fend off frostbite. There's a practical rhythm to it. Servants replaced rushes more frequently in winter, not just for hygiene but because damp reeds conducted cold faster. Drier, fresher bundles offered more insulation. Archaeological digs in certain castles have revealed compacted layers of rushes, preserved beneath collapsed walls, proving just how thick these accumulations could get. Some layers were over a foot deep, essentially a plant carpet designed to fight the cold. Of course, the debate continues among historians. Did these layers actually trap warmth effectively, or did they serve more as symbolic cleanliness? Some argue that the aromatic herbs sprinkled among them had more psychological effect than practical warmth. Others counter that even a thin natural mat could break the transfer of heat from body to stone, making the difference between tolerable sleep and misery. The answer likely lies somewhere in between. Picture the great hall at its quietest moment. Fires low, bodies curled in rows, dogs sprawled between servants, and everywhere the smell of crushed greenery underfoot. It isn't luxurious, but it is communal. The rushes create a shared ground that both softens and unifies the space. When dawn comes, people rise, shake off the reeds stuck to their cloaks, and scatter toward their duties, leaving the floor looking more like a barn than a lord's chamber. And yet, night after night it served. As you turn to leave the corridor, your hand brushes the wall, cool and damp against your fingers. The rushes rustle one last time under your step. They were never meant to be a perfect solution, only a compromise, part bedding, part insulation, part deodorizer. But in a castle battered by a blizzard, compromises were what kept people alive. The snow may rage against the shutters, the wind may find its way through cracks, but underfoot lies a reminder. Sometimes, survival is about small comforts, like a handful of herbs mixed with straw beneath a weary body. You pause at the edge of the hall and notice the shapes of people bundled under rough coverings. What strikes you next is not the stone walls or the smell of damp rushes, but the sheer variety of fabrics heaped upon them. If there was one essential defense against the bitter breath of a blizzard, it was cloth layer upon layer of wool, linen, fur, and sometimes even silk for the fortunate few. These textiles were not just luxuries, they were lifelines. Wool was king. Contemporary accounts describe it as the most reliable insulator, spun thick and woven into blankets, cloaks, and tunics. Even coarse wool, scratchy against the skin, held warmth far better than anything else available. The castle's storerooms often overflowed with woolen goods, both for household use and for trade. As you pull one across your shoulders, you feel its weight press down, heavy but comforting, the fibers rough, yet oddly reassuring. That sensation of heaviness was part of its magic. To lie beneath wool was to feel anchored against the cold, as if the storm outside had less power over you. Linen, in contrast, was lighter and softer, but it was rarely used alone. People slept between linen sheets when they could, layering wool or fur over them. The combination of textures mattered. Linen wicked moisture away, keeping sweat from chilling the body, while wool trapped heat. Archaeological finds of medieval bedding often reveal these mixtures: fabrics sewn together, scraps recycled from old garments, every piece pressed into service. Survival meant nothing was wasted. Fur, however, was the crown jewel. Chronicles note how nobles slept beneath fox, bear, or even ermine pelts. Imagine lying down while servants draped such hides over you, the smell of musk and wild forest clinging faintly to them. Fur not only provided insulation, but carried symbolic weight. To sleep under the skin of a predator was to proclaim dominion over nature. Yet practicality underpinned even that symbolism. Fur was astonishingly warm, and in a castle besieged by snow, its value was beyond price. Travelers' diaries provide odd glimpses into these nightly routines. One Italian visitor to England remarked with surprise at how many layers northerners piled onto their beds, joking that it was like sleeping beneath an entire herd of sheep. To him, the sight seemed almost comical, but to those living through northern winters, it was a matter of survival. You can picture yourself lying flat, hardly able to move under the weight of the blankets, but grateful that the immobility at least meant warmth. There's still debate among historians about how widely furs were used by ordinary castle folk. Some suggest that only the wealthy could afford them, while others argue that rabbit and sheepskin were common enough to appear in servants' quarters. The evidence is fragmentary, but it hints at a spectrum: rare pelts for lords, everyday skins for retainers, and scratchy wool for everyone else. The lines blur when inventories list skins without specifying their type. Were they luxury items or humble scraps? The uncertainty lingers. You shift your weight, imagining the feel of layered garments against your skin. Medieval sleepers often wore clothing to bed, unlike our modern custom of undressing for the night. A long tunic, thick stockings, and even a hooded coif might accompany someone under the covers. The logic was simple. Why surrender any warmth your clothes had gathered during the day? To peel them off would be to invite frost onto bare flesh. The rustle of fabric as people turned in their sleep would have been constant, a low chorus of wool and linen brushing in the darkness. There is a curious anecdote about the Countess of Hainault, who supposedly slept with not one but two fur mantles over her bedclothes during a fierce winter storm. The story goes that she declared herself wrapped as snug as any babe in swaddling, a rare moment of humour preserved in a court record. Such exaggerations remind us that while survival was serious, people still found ways to laugh at their own bundles of fabric. The sensory picture deepens. You inhale the lanolin scent of wool, faintly greasy, mingling with the sharper tang of smoke from the hearth. The touch of fur is dense and soft under your fingertips, each hair bristling with trapped warmth. When you press your cheek against the linen beneath, it is cool at first, then slowly warming, like a handshake with a friend reluctant to let go. Yet, despite all these precautions, the chill never truly left. You imagine waking in the dead of night, the fire reduced to embers, and feeling your nose frozen, even while your body sweats beneath layers of blankets. Breath crystallizes in the air, drifting upward like tiny ghosts. To survive, you simply pull the coverings tighter, burying yourself deeper into the cocoon, praying morning comes quickly. Records show that storerooms were carefully managed in winter. Stewards tallied the number of blankets and furs, ensuring they were allocated where most needed. In some households, extra coverings were lent to favoured retainers during the coldest spells. In others, they were hoarded, locked in chests, used only when noble guests arrived. The politics of fabric shaped who slept warmly and who shivered through the storm. One peculiar tradition noted in Scandinavia was the use of reindeer hides spread hair side up as bed covers. Their hollow hairs trapped heat so efficiently that even in the fiercest snowstorms, sleepers remained insulated. Travelers marveled at this practice, sometimes adopting it temporarily before returning home to their less exotic sheepskins. It's an image that lingers. The wind shrieking outside, the castle rattling in its foundations, and you lying snug beneath the hide of a creature built by nature to endure exactly such trials. Modern historians continue to question just how much warmth all these layers could realistically provide. Could wool and fur truly stand against temperatures that froze water barrels solid inside castle kitchens? Some argue yes, pointing to the insulating power of natural fibers. Others doubt, suggesting that even with the best bedding, sleep was often shallow, broken by shivers, and the need to huddle closer to companions. The truth, as always, likely lies in a mixture moments of comfort, punctuated by hours of discomfort, endurance stitched together by fabric. As you close your eyes, the blizzard still howls against the shutters, but within your cocoon of wool and fur, there is a fragile peace. Your limbs grow heavy, your breath steadies, and for a brief while, you almost forget the storm. The castle remains cold, the stone unyielding, but cloth humble, practical, endlessly layered, has given you the one thing you need most in winter, a fighting chance at sleep. You step quietly toward a corner of the chamber and notice a bed, unlike the low pallets or heaps of straw that most castle residents endured. Here stands the canopy bed, 4 stout posts rising upward, draped with thick curtains that enclose the sleeper like a fabric fortress within a stone one. The design is practical as much as it is imposing. Inside, with the curtains drawn, warmth is trapped, body heat multiplies, and the howling of the blizzard outside is softened to a dull murmur. You draw a curtain aside and peer within. It feels like stepping into a smaller, more intimate world. Contemporary accounts make it clear that these enclosed beds were prized among the wealthy. They symbolize status, yes, but also ingenuity. The heavy curtains were not just for decoration, they created a microclimate in which temperatures could remain several degrees higher than the rest of the room. In a castle where stone walls sucked heat like sponges, those few degrees could mean the difference between sleep and shivering wakefulness. The wooden frame itself, often carved with intricate designs, acted as both support and a subtle psychological comfort, marking a boundary between you and the drafty void beyond. Imagine yourself lying down inside such a bed. You pull the curtain closed, and at once the world shifts. The flickering of torches dims, the draft against your cheek disappears, and the sound of the storm becomes muted. The air inside is warmer, tinged with the scent of wool, fur, and faint lavender sachets tucked among the linens. Outside, the fire may dwindle, servants may snore on rushes, but you, tucked within your curtained cocoon, feel as though you've been transported to a safer place. One curious custom emerges in the records. Some households embroidered prayers or protective charms onto the inner lining of the bed curtains. These were not just symbols of piety, they were talismans against both the physical cold and the spiritual fears of the night. Picture a noblewoman tracing stitched words of scripture with her fingers as the wind rattles the shutters, murmuring them before drifting off, convinced that cloth and faith together formed a barrier stronger than stone. Archaeological evidence supports the existence of enclosed beds, even in humbler settings. Excavations in northern Europe have revealed remnants of box beds, wooden sleeping compartments built directly into walls, sealed by sliding panels or doors. These snug spaces, often shared by multiple sleepers, were the commoner's version of the noble canopy bed. Both served the same purpose, trapping warmth and creating psychological comfort. Yet not all historians agree on how effective these contraptions were. Some insist that fully enclosed beds became stifling, their air stale and smoky, while others argue they were lifesavers during bitter winters. The debate remains lively, with modern reconstructions suggesting both outcomes were possible depending on ventilation. The sensory details of such a bed linger vividly. Curtains brushed your skin as you shifted. The wood frame creaked faintly, a reminder of the craftsman's labor. Inside, air was warm but also tinged with smoke that had seeped into every fiber over years of use. The feel of fur blankets against your legs contrasted with the smoother linen beneath your back. Your breath condensed faintly on the curtain fabric, dampening it, only to dry again as the brazier flared. There is a peculiar anecdote from a 15th century French household. A lord complained that his bed curtains had been gnawed by mice seeking shelter from the cold. Servants were scolded not for poor pest control, but for failing to patch the curtains quickly, because to sleep with a gap in the barrier was considered nearly unthinkable during blizzard nights. The story captures the importance of this fabric shield. Even a hole made by rodents could mean an unwelcome draught slipping in. Inside the canopy bed, the experience of sound shifted too. With curtains drawn, noises dulled. The snores of servants in the hall became distant hums. The crackle of the fire was softened. The storm outside, once a banshee shrieking against the stone, now seemed like a faint drumbeat. This muted environment carried psychological weight, letting people drift into sleep more easily, convinced they were insulated from both cold and chaos. And yet, disagreement persists among researchers about how common canopy beds truly were in medieval castles. Some argue they were rare luxuries reserved for the wealthiest, while others suggest they became widespread by the late Middle Ages, appearing even in modest households. Inventories show frequent mentions of bedsteads with hangings, but whether these were true canopies or simpler draped cloths remains open to interpretation. The evidence is tantalizing but incomplete, leaving room for ongoing discussion. You picture the household at night. In the great hall, retainers cluster near the hearth, huddling together beneath coarse wool. Children curl beside their parents in shared pallets. But in the solar, the lord and lady slip behind heavy curtains, sealing themselves into a cocoon of warmth and privacy. The symbolism is unmistakable. Here lies the boundary of class, marked not by gold or jewels, but by a bed with curtains thick enough to block winter's breath. There is an odd cultural note, too. In some regions, closing the bed curtains became a ritual, almost theatrical. Servants would draw them shut with ceremony, ensuring no gap remained, as though they were sealing their lord inside a protective womb. Some households even hung bells or charms on the curtain ties, so that if someone tried to intrude during the night, the disturbance would rattle a warning. Safety and warmth mingled in one enclosed space. You pull the curtain closed once more and sit within the dimness. The storm still rages outside the castle walls, snow piling against battlements, winds shrieking through arrow slits. But here, in the womb-like enclosure of the canopy bed, the cold is held at bay. Your limbs relax, your eyelids grow heavy, and for a brief while you forget the stone chill of the hall beyond. This was the promise of the canopy, not total warmth, but the illusion of security, a fragile sanctuary crafted from wood, fabric, and hope. The curtain of the canopy bed falls softly behind you as you step away, and once more you are reminded of the great contrast between nobles and the many others who filled the castle at night. Not everyone had a bed with carved posts and woolen hangings. For most, survival during a blizzard was about sharing. Bodies became blankets, and companionship became insulation. To sleep alone was to invite the cold to creep into your bones, but to sleep together was to borrow warmth from one another. Evidence from household accounts makes it clear that bed sharing was common, not merely among the poor, but even among lords when necessity struck. Imagine the sight: two grown men, retainers of their master, pressed shoulder to shoulder under a single coverlet, neither daring to complain because comfort was secondary to staying alive until morning. Children piled in with parents, apprentices curled beside their masters, servants bunched together like logs stacked for a fire. Privacy mattered little when the storm howled outside and the walls breathed frost into every chamber. Travel diaries from the 13th century tell a few amusing anecdotes. One English knight, travelling through Flanders, wrote wryly about being stuffed like a sausage between two other men in a roadside inn, grateful at least that his companions were quiet sleepers. Such humour reveals a truth. The situation could be awkward, even comical, but warmth trumped pride. When you envision yourself slipping under a blanket with two strangers during a castle blizzard, you might laugh, but your survival instinct would silence any protest. Of course, not all historians agree on how widespread such practices were inside castles specifically. Some argue that servants almost always slept communally, while others point out that certain records describe individuals with their own pallets, suggesting more separation. The balance of evidence indicates that when the cold grew dangerous, the line between personal space and necessity blurred. Shared heat was simply too valuable to waste. The sensory memory of this arrangement would have been unmistakable. You'd smell the sweat of your companions, feel their elbows digging into your ribs, and hear the chorus of snores, coughs, and shifting bodies. Yet alongside the discomfort was a palpable sense of safety. The knowledge that you were not facing the night alone. Your breath mingled with theirs, clouding the air above in a foggy canopy. The weight of another's body pressing against you meant the cold had less room to creep in. There's an odd tidbit recorded by a 14th century chronicler. In certain northern households, it was considered unlucky to sleep without at least one other person beside you during a winter storm. The belief was partly practical. More bodies meant more warmth, but also spiritual. People feared that loneliness in the night made one vulnerable to spirits of frost. By curling up together, they not only fought the cold but also the unseen. This raises a question that scholars continue to debate. Was bed-sharing born more from necessity or from custom? Did people huddle together purely because of cold? Or was it also a cultural practice tied to hospitality, kinship, and superstition? Some argue that it was both, and that the practical and the symbolic fed each other. What began as a way to endure the cold became a tradition of closeness, binding families and households together. The practice reached even into noble circles. Royal accounts mention visiting dignitaries offered beds already occupied by household members. In such cases, sharing was not seen as scandalous but normal. You can picture two noblemen, neither especially pleased, lying stiffly side by side while outside the wind scoured the battlements. Their servants might joke about it, but neither lord would dare reject the arrangement. It was the cost of comfort. The experience itself could vary. On good nights, shared warmth created genuine coziness, a sense of being cocooned in a human nest. On bad nights, lice, fleas, and the stench of unwashed bodies turned the situation into misery. Yet even misery was preferable to freezing. You might scratch your arm raw, wrinkle your nose at the smell of old sweat, and still press closer to your companion because frostbite was the greater enemy. One particularly strange report survives from a monastery where novices were punished by being made to sleep alone in winter. The implication is clear. Isolation was discomfort enough to serve as discipline. The fact that such a punishment existed tells us how ingrained communal sleeping was, not just for monks but for medieval people in general. The fear of solitary cold was sharper than most chastisements. You imagine the hall again, rows of bodies huddled together, cloaks piled, dogs curled in between, the embers of the fire painting them all in a faint glow. A child stirs and burrows deeper against her mother's side. Two men grumble as they roll over, bumping shoulders but saying nothing. The castle's stones moan with the wind, but within that human bundle there is warmth, imperfect but real. The lesson becomes clear. Survival was communal. Against a blizzard that could freeze barrels solid and glaze walls with frost, no one truly endured alone. Companionship, sometimes reluctant and sometimes cherished, became as vital as blankets or fire. You might not know the name of the person sharing your coverlet, but by dawn, you would be grateful for their presence. In a world of stone and snow, warmth was never solitary, it was always shared. You move further through the castle's chambers and come to a smaller room, dimly lit by a single sputtering lamp. The space is crowded, not with servants or soldiers, but with children. In noble households, the youngest often slept in the same chamber as their parents, nestled in small beds or pallets scattered around the main bed. It wasn't only for convenience, it was for survival. The cold that prowled through stone walls was merciless. and children, smaller and more fragile, needed every scrap of protection they could be given. Household records from the 13th and 14th centuries frequently mention cradles in the solar or little beds by the chamber wall. These were not luxuries but necessities. Infants slept in wooden cribs, sometimes covered with thin hoods to block drafts. Older children shared narrow pallets with siblings, often beneath the same heavy wool blanket. You can imagine the room, the lord and lady behind their curtains in the great bed, while nearby 2 or 3 children lie side by side, their small breaths fogging the winter air. The closeness of family was not only emotional, it was thermal. The arrangement had practical benefits beyond warmth. Parents wanted their children close, where cries in the night could be quickly soothed and blankets pulled tighter. In times of storm, when snow piled against doors and winds wailed through cracks, parents might rise to check on their little ones, adding another fur or tucking in an edge. In that sense, winter nights became family rituals of constant adjustment, checking, covering, comforting. There are curious descriptions in chronicles that show how far households went to keep children warm. One French noblewoman reportedly lined her children's cradles with sheepskin, fur side inward, believing it guarded against both chill and evil spirits. Another account from England tells of a boy kept warm with heated stones wrapped in cloth, placed carefully at the foot of his pallet. These details remind you that medieval people were endlessly inventive, even when their tools were crude. Of course, not all historians agree on how protective these measures truly were. Some argue that medieval children endured more exposure to cold than we imagine, with high infant mortality reflecting harsh living conditions. Others counter that families did all they could within their means, layering children in wool, fur, and cloaks, and that closeness in shared chambers greatly increased survival chances. The evidence is mixed, but the care shown in records, sheepskin linings, heated stones, extra quilts, suggests that parents fought the cold with determination, even if they didn't always win. The sensory reality of such a night is easy to picture. You hear the soft whimpers of a child as she shifts in her sleep, only to be hushed by a mother's hand smoothing her hair. The scent of warmed milk lingers faintly in the room, mixed with the lanolin tang of woolen blankets. The wooden cradle creaks gently as an infant stirs, then settles. You feel the air warmer here, not because the walls are any less cold, but because the press of bodies, parents, children, servants bustling in and out creates a microclimate of its own. One strange belief surfaces in German folklore. Some families placed iron nails or scissors under a child's cradle during a snowstorm, convinced that iron repelled spirits of frost that might otherwise steal a baby's warmth. Whether or not such spirits were real, the symbolism reinforced the urgency of protecting children against the unseen dangers of winter nights. And there are disputes among scholars, too, about whether children of servants or retainers ever shared noble chambers in times of blizzard. Some suggest that in the coldest spells, even class barriers softened, and the Lord might allow more people into the solar simply because everybody meant more warmth. Others doubt this, pointing out that social divisions were too strict. The truth is hard to pin down, but you can imagine desperate nights when even pride bent before the storm. What strikes you most in this chamber is the blend of vulnerability and resilience. Children, bundled tightly in rough blankets, whispered lullabies murmured by weary mothers, fathers pacing slowly with infants in arms, all these scenes formed part of castle life in winter. The walls may have been thick, the fires bright, but survival depended not just on stone and flame, but on the quiet determination to keep the youngest safe. Imagine lying here yourself, on a pallet beside your siblings. You feel your sister's cold toes press against your leg, your brother's elbow dig into your ribs, and though you might grumble, you don't pull away. Instead, you inch closer, because each inch matters in the cold. You drift into sleep listening to your parents' murmurs, the storm outside muffled by fur and fabric, and the steady comfort of being together. In the end, the children's chamber is a reminder. Warmth was not measured only in fires and blankets, but in proximity. Families pressed close, watching over one another, determined to see the morning through the longest nights. The castle's blizzard night presses on, and you find yourself following the faint glow of torchlight toward a cluster of sleeping figures. Their forms are almost indistinguishable under the heaps of cloth and furs, but as you step closer, you notice details. The long nightshirts, the woolen hose pulled up under tunics, the curious caps and coifs tied snugly around heads. Medieval bedtime fashion was not about elegance, it was about survival. Contemporary inventories list nightgowns made of thick wool or linen, long, loose garments that reached the ankles. These were worn by both men and women, functioning as pajamas but also as additional layers of insulation. The garments often doubled as day wear. One might simply loosen the belt, slip under a blanket, and declare the day done. In a world without central heating, every scrap of cloth was too precious to waste. You might sleep in the very shirt you wore while tending fires, and wake to wear it again. Head coverings were especially important. Heat escapes rapidly from an uncovered scalp, and medieval people knew it intuitively. That is why so many images in manuscripts depict sleepers wearing caps or coifs. Imagine tugging a woolen hood down over your ears, feeling its scratchy fibers tickle your cheek. The discomfort mattered little when compared to the pain of a cold wind sneaking across your bare skin. Children were often bundled with caps tied under their chins, making them resemble little bundled parcels, safe against the night. There's a curious note from a 14th century wardrobe account, mentioning bed slippers, soft shoes reserved for wearing indoors, even under covers. The idea was simple: keep toes warm, keep the body alive. Today it may sound odd to climb into bed with shoes on, but in a castle's icy chambers, it was practical. Toes left unprotected risked frostbite, even when wrapped in wool. The experience of lying in such clothing was very different from our modern habits. You'd feel layers pressing against your skin, an undertunic, hose, a long nightshirt, perhaps even a cloak spread on top. Rolling over wasn't graceful, it was a chore. You'd hear the whisper of fabric rubbing, the snap of a belt loosening, the sigh as a hood was adjusted. And in the darkness, everyone looked similar. Shapeless figures swaddled in cloth, more like bundles of laundry than individuals. Some researchers insist that medieval people never thought of night clothes the way we do. They argue that what we call nightshirts were just ordinary tunics repurposed. Others maintain that there were garments made expressly for bed, softer or cut differently. Surviving records are vague, and so the debate continues. Were nightshirts truly a separate category, or simply recycled daily wear? The question lingers in the fabric of history, unresolved. Odd customs appear too. In certain regions, people sprinkled their night garments with herbs like lavender or thyme before sleep. This wasn't only for scent, it was believed to ward off lice or fleas, ever-present companions in communal halls. Picture pulling a shirt over your head and catching a whiff of thyme, sharp and clean, mingling with the smoky air of the chamber. For a moment, it might almost smell pleasant. Another eccentric detail comes from Scandinavia, where woolen masks resembling balaclavas were sometimes worn in the harshest winters. These covered most of the face, leaving only the eyes and mouth exposed. Imagine the surreal sight of sleepers arranged like rows of masked figures, more suited for raiding a fortress than dreaming inside one. Yet these masks meant survival, a way to keep frost from biting cheeks and noses. The sensory immersion is powerful here. You feel the weight of cloth around you, layered until you almost lose sense of your own skin. The air smells faintly of sheep's wool, of sweat trapped in fibers, of herbs crushed between seams. When you breathe, your hood dampens with condensation, then dries again. The scratch against your jaw is constant, irritating, but you know that removing it would invite the cold to steal your warmth. Accounts from noble households sometimes mention the extravagance of fur-lined nightclothes. Ermine and sable linings made garments soft and luxurious, while also dramatically increasing insulation. But such comforts were rare. For most, survival meant scratchy wool, patched linen, and re-stitched seams. A noble might dream wrapped in ermine, but a servant was lucky to have a second blanket and a cap without holes. Scholars remain divided on whether people undressed fully in warmer months or always slept clothed year-round. Some point to depictions of nude sleepers in medieval art as proof that clothing was seasonal. Others counter that these images were symbolic, representing innocence or vulnerability rather than daily life. The truth may lie in regional differences. Southern climates perhaps allowed lighter attire, while in northern castles, undressing was unthinkable when snow pressed against the shutters. What unites all these details is the sheer practicality. In a world where your very breath frosted before you, fashion at bedtime was stripped of vanity. The goal was simple: trap heat, cover skin, block drafts. You might laugh today at the idea of a grown man in a long nightshirt and pointed cap, but if you stood in his chamber during a blizzard, you'd reach for the same garments without hesitation. Imagine settling down now. You pull your nightshirt tight, tug the cap over your ears, wiggle your toes inside soft slippers, and curl beneath woolen blankets. The storm rattles the windows, but within your cocoon of cloth, you feel defended. Not comfortable, not luxurious, but defended against the endless cold that seeps into every stone. You leave behind the bundled sleepers in their long nightshirts and follow the scent of smoke toward another chamber. Here, a small group of servants fuss around curious contraptions, metal pans with long handles, clay pots, and heated stones wrapped in cloth. These are the bed warmers, improvised tools for chasing the frost out of bedding before anyone dares to lie down. The very sight of them reveals just how desperate people were to fight the blizzard's chill within a castle's walls. Contemporary records describe these warming devices in detail. The most common were metal pans, often brass or copper, filled with glowing coals from the hearth. A servant would slide the pan between layers of sheets, moving it back and forth to drive away the worst of the cold. You can imagine the hiss as embers touched damp fabric, the faint smoke that clung to blankets afterward. The bed, once icy, became at least tolerable. The danger, of course, was fire. More than one bed was lost to an ember left too long. Clay or soapstone pots provided another solution. Heated in the fireplace, then wrapped in cloth, they were slipped beneath the covers or placed at the foot of the bed. The warmth radiated slowly, fading only after several hours. Archaeological finds of these pots across Europe confirm their widespread use. Run your hand across the surface of one, and you'd feel the residual heat, the faint smell of ash lingering on your skin. It wasn't modern comfort, but it was ingenious. One rather amusing account comes from a 15th century household where a servant was chastised for placing a pan of coals too close to the Lord's feet. The poor man yelped in the night, convinced the devil himself had reached under his blankets. Afterward, stricter rules were set. The pan must be kept in constant motion and removed before any sleeper settled in. Even survival tools, it seems, could turn comical or dangerous in the wrong hands. There's ongoing disagreement among historians about how widespread these devices truly were. Some argue they were luxuries, confined to noble households with the resources to own metal pans or dedicate servants to tending them. Others counter that heated stones wrapped in cloth were simple enough for even poorer retainers to use, requiring nothing more than a hearth and a bit of ingenuity. The evidence is scattered, leaving the true extent uncertain. What is clear, however, is that when blizzards rattled castle windows, every household looked for ways to pre-warm the bed before climbing in. The sensory landscape of these tools is vivid. Picture lying down in a bed recently scoured by a coal pan. The sheets still smell faintly of smoke, the warmth uneven hot patches against your legs, cooler spots by your shoulders. You tuck your toes against a heated stone, sighing with relief as the initial sting of cold recedes. Yet the warmth fades quickly, and before long you find yourself curling tighter, wishing for just one more stone, one more ember. The fight against the cold was never fully won, it was only delayed. Odd traditions emerged too. In some Italian households, warm bricks were wrapped in cabbage leaves before being slipped under covers. The leaves provided insulation, preventing burns, while also releasing a faint vegetable scent. Imagine drifting to sleep beneath blankets perfumed with the ghost of a winter garden. A strange comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. At times, warming devices extended beyond beds. Servants carried heated stones in baskets covered with cloth, setting them under benches or at people's feet during long evenings in the hall. Chronicles mention noblewomen tucking small pots into their lap as they sewed, their fingers numbed by draughts. These portable heat sources blurred the line between bedchamber and great hall, showing how survival meant constant negotiation with the cold. And still, scholars puzzle over how effective these devices were. Did they truly transform the experience of sleep, or were they brief luxuries that faded long before dawn? Some suggest the psychological comfort was as valuable as the physical heat. To slide into a bed recently warmed, even if it cooled within the hour, provided a sense of reassurance, a reminder that people were not entirely helpless against the winter. You linger in the chamber, watching a servant lift a pan of glowing coals, his face lit orange by the embers. He slides it under the Lord's bedclothes, moves it carefully, then withdraws it with practiced precision. The bed is ready, warmer than the air around it, a small triumph over the storm. Outside, the wind howls, snow piles against the keep, and the castle shivers. Inside, someone will lie down tonight and, for a short while, believe the blizzard cannot reach them. Imagine yourself climbing into such a bed. Your hand touches the fabric and finds it not icy but merely cool. Your toes nestle against a stone still radiating heat. You smile faintly, knowing it won't last, but grateful nonetheless. The blizzard rages, the castle moans, yet for this moment you feel almost at peace, lulled by warmth stolen from the hearth and carried into your dreams. The chamber smells faintly of smoke and wool, but as you drift closer to the hearth, another aroma joins the air, malty, yeasty, almost sweet. Someone is passing around a pitcher, filling wooden cups with warm ale. In the middle of a blizzard, with frost snaking down the walls and breath turning white in the torchlight, this humble drink is not simply indulgence. It is another weapon in the endless war against the cold. Chroniclers of the Middle Ages describe how ale or wine, sometimes mulled with spices, was often taken before bed during the harshest months. The warmth of the liquid provided an immediate comfort, spreading through the body like a brief summer Sunday. Alcohol dulled the edge of fear as winds roared against the battlements, and it soothed nerves frayed by hours of shivering. In the dim glow of a castle hall, the ritual of drinking together created both heat and camaraderie. Imagine holding such a cup yourself. The wood is rough against your palms, but the liquid inside steams gently. You sip, and the first taste is bitter, followed by a mellow sweetness. The warmth pools in your belly, radiating outward. Around you, companions murmur and sigh, their cheeks flushed not just from firelight but from drink. For a fleeting moment, you believe you could endure the night. There's a peculiar mention in a 14th century household account of adding beaten egg yolks to spiced ale, a sort of proto-eggnog thought to strengthen the body against chill. The mixture must have been thick, almost custard-like, heavy on the tongue, odd perhaps to modern tastes, but in a castle battered by snow, you'd hardly complain. You'd swallow gratefully, even if the flavor puzzled you. Not everyone agrees on the effectiveness of these drinks. Some medical texts of the time warned that alcohol could inflame the humors and weaken the body, making one more vulnerable to illness. Others praised it as a tonic against cold, claiming that heated wine or ale opened the channels and let blood flow more easily. Even today, scholars dispute whether the practice truly helped survival or merely gave the illusion of warmth. The debate echoes through centuries. Did alcohol save lives in frozen chambers, or was it a dangerous comfort? You hear laughter ripple across the hall as servants and guards pass the pitcher, their shoulders relaxing despite the storm rattling the shutters. Drinking before bed was not only about physiology, it was about morale. In a place where snow pressed against the very walls, Every sip carried a reminder that people still held on to cheer, that the castle was not wholly conquered by the blizzard outside. Picture the sensory world of that moment. The fire hisses as a log collapses into embers. The bitter tang of ale clings to your lips, its warmth mingling with the scratch of wool against your skin. Someone belches softly, provoking muffled chuckles. Dogs lie sprawled at their master's feet, occasionally raising their heads at the sound of clinking cups. The storm continues its assault beyond the walls, but inside, a fragile circle of warmth and fellowship forms around shared drink. A curious anecdote survives from a monastic chronicle. Monks, forbidden by strict rule to indulge heavily, were granted heated beer for health during a particularly harsh winter. The entry notes that the concession was temporary, until the cold relents. One imagines the quiet satisfaction of those monks, sipping hot beer in their dormitory, grateful for both the warmth and the brief bending of rules. And yet, drinking before bed was not without risks. Too much ale might make one sleep too deeply, leaving blankets askew and toes exposed to freezing air. There are tales of men waking half-covered, their bodies shivering violently after the drink wore off. Moderation, then, was key. A single cup, maybe two enough to lull, but not to strip away caution. Modern historians still puzzle over how much alcohol contributed to winter survival. Was it genuinely a protective ritual, or more a psychological balm, offering courage against the darkness? Perhaps it was both. What is certain is that people clung to the practice for centuries, enough that references to warmed ale or spiced wine appear again and again in medieval writings. Imagine finishing your cup now. You lick the last sweetness from the rim, hand the vessel back, and curl beneath your blankets. Your stomach feels full, your body drowsy, your mind a little lighter. Outside, the blizzard screams, but inside you drift towards sleep with warmth in your belly and the faint taste of spice on your tongue. For tonight, you have claimed one more victory against the cold. The hall quiets as cups are set aside and snores begin to echo, but you notice one more trick used to hold the cold at bay. Food. A full stomach generates warmth, and in a castle battered by a blizzard, the leftovers from winter feasts often became as important as blankets or fires. The night after a feast, when the hearth is banked and the winds rage, people curl into sleep with bellies still heavy, and that heaviness itself is a form of protection. Contemporary chronicles remind us that medieval winters were punctuated by celebrations: Christmas, Epiphany, Candlemas, occasions when households gorged on roasted meats, bread, and ale. Even when storms howled outside, kitchens remained busy, boiling stews thick enough to keep all but the harshest hunger away. Eating well before bed meant more than satisfaction. It meant insulation. You can imagine lying down after such a meal, the warmth of roasted mutton still radiating from your core, fighting off the icy air that seeped through cracks in the walls. The practicality of this habit is underscored by medical texts of the time. Writers claimed that food heated the stomach and the humors, protecting against the dangers of winter nights. Whether scientifically accurate or not, the belief guided behavior. Servants and lords alike sought to eat heartily before retiring, knowing that an empty belly was a liability when temperatures dropped. One curious detail emerges from household records. Some families deliberately saved fatty cuts of meat and rich pies for the coldest nights, reasoning that these foods stuck to the body longer. The logic is not entirely flawed. Fats and proteins provide slower burning energy. Imagine gnawing on a greasy joint of pork by firelight, the taste lingering on your lips as you shuffle toward bed, trusting that the calories will shield you until morning. There is debate among historians about how equally this practice applied across the household. Did retainers and servants truly have access to hearty food on stormy nights? Or was it mostly nobles who ate their fill while others endured meager rations? Some accounts suggest generosity, describing great cauldrons of stew ladled out to all who served the castle. Others paint a starker picture, with scraps handed to the lower ranks while the lord dined lavishly. The truth likely varied from household to household, shaped by wealth, season, and temperament of the ruling family. The sensory impression of such a night is vivid. You smell roasted meat, thick gravy congealing on trenchers, bread still warm from the oven. The fire crackles, throwing sparks that briefly illuminate grease-shiny lips and satisfied grins. Dogs lick discarded bones, tails wagging in the shadows. The storm roars beyond the shutters, but inside, the smell of feasting clings to the air, reassuring and heavy. Odd anecdotes abound. One tale from Burgundy describes a nobleman insisting that his guests consume spiced sausages late at night, lest their sleep turn to ice. Another account tells of peasants near a castle, sneaking into the kitchens during a storm, beg for stew, believing that without it, they would not live until dawn. These stories may seem exaggerated, but they reveal how tightly food and survival were bound in the medieval imagination. Not everyone agreed on the benefits of such heavy meals, however. Some physicians cautioned against stuffing the stomach before rest, arguing it led to nightmares and indigestion. Others swore by it, noting that soldiers on campaign always slept warmer after a hearty supper. The medical debate has never fully settled. Was food a genuine defense against the cold, or simply a comfort that made suffering easier to bear? You picture the great hall now. A few plates still rest on trestle tables, scraps of bread gone stale, bones gnawed nearly clean. A servant sneaks a final bite before curling up on the rushes. A child licks her fingers, savouring the last honeyed crumb before pulling a blanket around her shoulders. The castle settles into silence, but beneath every cloak and quilt is the memory of supper, a warmth that lingers invisibly as bodies drift into slumber. For you, the feeling is unmistakable. You lie down with your belly full, breath slower, limbs heavier. The storm still howls. The stone walls still leak frost. But inside you there is a glow, a stubborn ember of warmth fed by the feast. It may not last the whole night, but for now, it keeps the blizzard's claws at bay. The fire in the hall smoulders low, and most bodies are already bundled into uneasy sleep. But as you shift, rolling onto your side, you feel something warm press against your legs. At first you think it's another servant seeking heat. Then you hear the soft sigh of a muzzle, the faint scratch of claws on rushes. It is no person at all, it is a dog. In the medieval castle, dogs were more than hunters or guards. They were bedfellows, loyal heaters that turned icy nights into something survivable. Household accounts and tapestries frequently depict dogs lying near their master's feet. They appear in both noble and peasant contexts, curling up wherever warmth could be found. The logic was simple. A living creature radiates heat, and to let it go to waste would have been foolish. You can imagine the comfort of a thick-coated mastiff pressing its bulk against your shins, or a smaller spaniel burrowing under your cloak as snowflakes rattled at the shutters. There's a curious entry in a 15th century court record that mentions a quarrel between two servants over who would sleep nearest the lord's hounds during a winter storm. The dispute became so heated that it required intervention from the steward. The detail seems almost comical, yet it highlights the value of a dog's warmth so prized that humans fought over it. The practice was not without symbolism. For nobles, allowing dogs onto their beds was sometimes a gesture of affection, a display that even the mightiest lord relied on humble animal warmth. For servants, sleeping among hounds reinforced bonds with creatures that also shared their labor and hardships. Dogs were not just pets, they were partners in survival. Still, scholars remain divided on whether all households permitted dogs in bedchambers. Some argue it was common, especially in hunting households where hounds were beloved. Others insist it was frowned upon, at least officially, with clerics denouncing the unclean habit of sharing sheets with beasts. The evidence varies by region and class. A tapestry might show a noble lady with a lapdog curled beside her, while a sermon might condemn the very idea. History offers no single answer, only the certainty that many ignored such prohibitions when frost clawed at their bones. The sensory reality is undeniable. You feel coarse fur bristling against your skin, the steady warmth of a body pressed close. The smell is strong animal musk mixed with the faint tang of damp straw, but in the bitter dark, it is oddly comforting. You hear the rhythmic sound of a dog's breathing, faster than a human's, like a lullaby from a loyal companion. Occasionally the dog twitches in its sleep, chasing dream prey, and the movement jostles you, but you don't mind. Better a restless dog beside you than the numbing chill of empty space. One peculiar tidbit comes from northern England, where smaller breeds were sometimes nicknamed comfort dogs because of their role in warming beds. Some households even bred them deliberately for this purpose, keeping them in the solar during the worst nights. Imagine a row of lapdogs scurrying under curtains, each choosing a pair of cold feet to warm. It's a scene both amusing and practical. There are also tales of danger. In one German castle, a panicked dog reportedly leapt onto the hearth during a storm, scattering embers and nearly setting bedding aflame. Servants scrambled to stomp out sparks while the hound whined. Afterward, the steward banned dogs from sleeping too near the fire, but not from sleeping near people. That line could not be drawn so easily, because the warmth they offered was irreplaceable. The debate among historians lingers. Were dogs primarily companions, or were they regarded more as living tools? Perhaps they were both. A noble might stroke a lapdog tenderly as it nestled beside her, while a servant simply thanked fortune for the body heat. Yet across classes, the presence of dogs in sleeping quarters is attested again and again, suggesting that practicality trumped scruples when blizzards struck. You close your eyes and lean into the sensation. The storm still claws at the shutters, the fire crackles faintly, but beside you, the dog radiates steady heat. You can feel its ribs rise and fall. Its tail thumps once in a dream. The companionship is wordless, primal. Two species sharing warmth against a hostile night, bound not by duty but by necessity. By dawn, when frost glazes the rushes and the fire is ash, you will wake still pressed against that loyal shape. And though the storm outside may not yet have relented, you will have endured because survival in a medieval castle was never just about stone walls or roaring fires. Sometimes, it was about the quiet gift of a dog asleep at your side. You wander further through the castle corridors, and your fingers brush against the walls. They are damp, icy, and unyielding. Even with fires burning in nearby hearths, the stone radiates cold like a giant frozen slab. But then you notice something different in one of the chambers. Tall, richly coloured hangings stretching from floor to ceiling. They ripple faintly in the draught, their woven figures dancing in the firelight. These are the tapestries, and in a medieval castle, they were more than decoration. They were armour against the cold. Written accounts from noble estates confirm their practical role. Tapestries, thickly woven from wool, sometimes lined with linen, helped insulate walls that otherwise leached warmth from every chamber. The difference was striking. A bare wall might drip with condensation and frost in midwinter, but a wall draped with a tapestry held at least a little warmth. Imagine lying in bed beside a cold wall versus one softened by fabric. The former steals your body heat in minutes, the latter gives you a chance at rest. Yet these hangings were not only functional, they were status symbols, parading scenes of hunts, battles, and legends across otherwise barren walls. Guests stepping into a chamber read a family's wealth in threads. But beneath the heraldry and artistry, the simple truth was that wool blocked wind better than naked stone. A nobleman might boast of his taste in art, but his shivering body was equally grateful for the warmth. There are charming details from chronicles. Herbs were sometimes stitched into linings or tucked into folds, releasing fragrance as they warmed. Lavender, thyme, even rosemary might mingle with the scent of smoke, masking the mildew of stone. Picture pressing your cheek against such fabric. You'd feel rough threads against your skin, smell faint herbs, and know that someone had thought not just of beauty but of comfort. Still, historians differ in opinion on how effective these textiles really were. Some argue that tapestries were largely symbolic, offering only a thin barrier against immense stone walls. Others point out their sheer thickness, several layers of wool, sometimes padded, that must have provided noticeable insulation. The debate remains unresolved, but archaeological fragments show just how heavy some of these hangings were. Lift one, and you'd need both arms, feeling its dense weight drag against your muscles. Odd habits appear in household accounts. In certain castles, hangings were rotated seasonally, lighter linens in summer, heavy woolen or velvet tapestries in winter. Some households even hung animal hides behind the fabric, creating double insulation. You can almost hear the muffled sounds inside such a chamber, the way voices grew softer because the fabric absorbed echoes. It must have felt like entering a cocoon, the storm outside reduced to a distant moan. A particularly curious anecdote tells of a Scottish lord who supposedly ordered tapestries sewn together to create a temporary tent within his hall during a blizzard. Servants and family slept inside this fabric fort, its layers of wool trapping body heat. It may sound improvised, but in a night of deadly cold, the difference between bare stone and woven wool could be the difference between life and death. The sensory experience of a tapestry-lined chamber is striking. The fabric shifts with drafts, brushing your sleeve. The firelight plays across woven huntsmen, making them seem to leap and chase. The smell of lanolin clings to the threads, faintly oily, mingling with herbs and smoke. When you lean close, you see uneven stitches, tiny imperfections that reveal the hands of weavers. These imperfections remind you that beneath all the grandeur, these hangings were handmade shields against winter. There is also disagreement among scholars about accessibility. Did only nobles benefit from such hangings, or did servants sometimes sleep in these decorated chambers during storms? Some suggest strict hierarchies prevented this, keeping warmth for the privileged. Others argue that in dire nights, practicality overrode. Formality, empty tapestry-lined rooms were filled with bodies desperate for warmth. The records don't settle the matter, leaving us to imagine both possibilities. Picture yourself now, sitting in a chamber whose walls are swaddled in wool. The storm rattles the shutters, snow pelts the towers, but inside, the sound is softened, dulled by fabric. The cold still lingers, but not with the same bite. You draw your cloak tighter, lean back, and feel the subtle difference. Stone no longer steals all your heat. For a moment, you understand why nobles prized these woven hangings so dearly. They were beauty, yes, but they were also survival stitched in thread. And so, as the blizzard rages outside, the tapestries ripple faintly, guardians of warmth and symbols of wealth, testaments to the ways medieval people fought both frost and fear. The chamber with its softening tapestries fades behind you, and you step back into the harsher corridors. Here the air feels sharper, more alive with drafts, and you catch sight of smoke curling along the ceiling. It leads you to one of the castle's hearths, a fire stubbornly burning against the night. For all their importance, fireplaces in medieval castles were imperfect allies. Chimneys, smoke holes, and flues represented both progress and limitation in the battle to heat a fortress during a blizzard. Early castles had open hearths in the center of the great hall, with smoke rising to a hole in the roof. The arrangement provided light and warmth but also left sleepers coughing, eyes stinging as soot descended from above. Later innovations added wall fireplaces with rudimentary chimneys, a significant improvement. Records from the 12th and 13th centuries show increasing references to new chimneys in castle accounts, evidence of their spread. They drew smoke upward more efficiently, allowing for somewhat cleaner air indoors. Still, the systems leaked heat, and sometimes failed altogether when snow clogged the openings or wind pressed down the flues. Imagine lying in bed on a stormy night. You hear the fire snap and hiss, smell the sharp tang of wood smoke, and feel warmth on your face. Yet behind you, the cold seeps through unchecked. Chimneys helped concentrate heat, but rarely spread it far. A person sitting 2 feet away might be comfortable, while another across the room froze. Archaeological surveys of castle remains confirm this unevenness. Burn marks on stone hearths show intense heat in one spot, while walls just meters away bore frost. One unusual practice noted in household records involved servants placing tall screens around the hearth. These wooden or fabric barriers kept heat from dissipating too quickly and protected people from sparks. Picture a small group huddled behind such a screen, forming a makeshift warm corner while the rest of the hall remained icy. The image is both cozy and stark comfort found in narrow, fragile pockets rather than whole rooms. But not all historians agree on how much chimneys improved life. Some argue they marked a turning point, making castles far more livable. Others suggest their impact was overstated, pointing out that drafts still whistled through unglazed windows and stone remained a poor insulator. The chimney may have lifted smoke, but it did not conquer the cold. The scholarly discussion continues, unresolved but illuminating. There's a quirky anecdote from a 14th century chronicle. During a severe blizzard, snow blew straight down a castle chimney, smothering the fire below. Servants frantically shoveled it out with iron ladles, their lord shouting that winter itself had invaded his hearth. The story may be exaggerated, but anyone who has seen wind drive snow sideways can imagine the plausibility. Fires, the very symbol of warmth, could be extinguished by the storm they were meant to resist. The sensory experience of such a night is unforgettable. Your face flushes from the fire, but your back prickles with cold. Smoke curls unpredictably when wind presses into the flue, stinging your eyes. Sparks leap, popping against stone. You taste ash on your tongue. Around you, bodies shuffle closer, seeking every scrap of heat, while those too far away pull cloaks tighter, resigned to chill. Odd solutions appeared across Europe. In some households, chimneys were angled or narrowed to resist drafts. Others built secondary vents to redirect smoke, creating complex systems that rarely worked as intended. Occasionally, households stuffed cloth into gaps or placed stones atop chimney openings during storms, desperate to keep out the snow. These improvisations reveal the constant struggle. Humans trying to tame fire and smoke in buildings never designed for comfort. The debate among scholars remains lively. Were medieval castles truly unbearable in winter, as travellers often complained, or were these accounts coloured by exaggeration? Some insist that fires and chimneys made life tolerable, pointing to long-inhabited keeps in cold regions. Others stress that even nobles wrapped in fur and seated by blazing hearths still shivered. The truth is likely both, that warmth was always relative, fleeting and fragile, no matter the technology. You linger by the hearth a moment longer, your cheeks burning as your toes ache with cold. The fire is fickle, its warmth uneven, its smoke intrusive. Yet it remains the heart of the room, the gathering point where people trade stories, sing softly, or simply sit in silence, hypnotized by the flames. Outside, the blizzard shrieks, snow battering the castle walls. Inside, imperfect as it is, the fireplace offers hope, a reminder that even a flawed fire is better than none. Leaving the smoky hearth behind, you take a turn into one of the narrower corridors, your torch flickering against walls that seem to breathe cold air. At first, you think the blizzard is finding its way through cracks in the shutters, but then you realize the drafts here are different, sharper, more sudden, as though the very stones are sighing. You've stumbled upon one of the castle's secret passages. They were built for strategy, for escape, and for moving unseen. Yet in winter, these hidden veins of the fortress became icy channels funneling the storms straight inside. Medieval castles often contained concealed staircases, tunnels within walls, and narrow shafts leading from one chamber to another. Chroniclers describe them as marvels of defense and intrigue, but architectural surveys reveal their unintended side effect. Drafts poured through them like water through cracks. You can imagine a noble standing proudly by his hidden door, boasting of escape routes, while servants cursed the chill that seeped from it every night. The sensory effect is immediate. You press your hand against the wall, and cold air whispers past your fingers, as though some phantom breathes from within. The torch sputters, flame bending toward the unseen opening. Your cloak flutters gently, betraying the current. In a castle already chilled by stone and wind, these secret spaces became invisible enemies of comfort. Some household records mention attempts to block them temporarily. Heavy tapestries were hung across suspicious doors, or chests were dragged against them to dam the draught. But secrecy often prevented full closure after all. What good is a hidden passage if it's barricaded by furniture? The result was compromise, cold tolerated for the sake of defence. An unusual anecdote comes from a Welsh castle, where a servant reportedly froze to death in a narrow wall passage while attempting to stoke a hidden lamp. The story may be tragic embellishment, yet it illustrates the peril of venturing into these unheated arteries during storms. Imagine being ordered to carry a message through a shaft as snow howled outside, your torch smothered, your breath clouding before your eyes, each step colder than the last. There is disagreement among historians about how much these passages truly worsened conditions. Some argue they were sealed tightly enough to limit drafts. Others insist their presence is why certain chambers never stayed warm, no matter how many fires burned. Archaeological evidence of soot stains within walls suggests fires were indeed drawn towards such channels, reinforcing the idea that airflow was constant. But just how severe? The debate remains open. Quirky customs developed to cope. In some households, servants stuffed straw into cracks before winter, pulling it out again when spring came. Others sprinkled herbs into the stuffing, hoping to mask the smell of damp air. Picture kneeling with hands full of dry grass, pushing it into a hidden seam while your breath frosts in the lamplight. The task may seem small, but for those who slept in adjacent chambers, it could mean the difference between tolerable and unbearable. You imagine lying in a bed near one such passage. The curtains of your canopy stir even though the fire burns steadily. You feel the draft snake along your spine, cold as a blade, refusing to be ignored. You pull the covers tighter, but the sensation remains a reminder that the castle is not sealed but riddled with hidden veins, where winter prowls freely. One curious detail emerges in folklore. Secret passages were sometimes blamed for hauntings. People believed the sudden gusts of air, the odd noises echoing through walls, were spirits wandering the keep. In reality, it was the blizzard's breath funneled through stone corridors. Yet in a world where superstition mingled with survival, the line between draft and ghost blurred. Scholars continue to debate whether these architectural flaws were accepted or actively resented. Did lords tolerate the cold as the price of security, or did they constantly seek to improve seals and barriers? Surviving documents show both perspectives: complaints about the cursed wind alongside praise for the cleverness of escape routes. Perhaps, as with much of castle life, discomfort was endured because the alternatives were unthinkable. The storm outside grows fiercer, snow hammering at walls, and still the drafts hiss through hidden seams. You walk slowly, torchlight flickering in narrow cracks, and understand the paradox. The very passages built to preserve life in siege became highways for the cold in winter. In a blizzard, secrecy and survival pulled in opposite directions, and those who tried to sleep nearby paid the price, tossing and turning under blankets, never free of the breath of invisible corridors whispering frost into their dreams. You leave the whispering drafts of the hidden passage and climb a narrow stair to the outer wall walk. The blizzard strikes you full in the face the moment you reach the battlements, a wall of snow and shrieking wind. The towers groan as if alive, and the shutters below rattle against their frames. What you notice most, though, is the way snow drifts against the keep itself, piling high along its base and sometimes pressing hard against doors and windows. These mounds of frozen powder were both shield and menace, shaping the way people inside slept through storm-bound nights. Chroniclers note that during fierce winters, snow piled so high it blocked lower-level entrances, forcing inhabitants to dig tunnels out come morning. In extreme cases, Entire doorways disappeared beneath the drifts. Imagine waking in the middle of the night and realizing the door you entered by has vanished under a mountain of snow. Inside the castle, that meant safety from intruders but also danger, since ventilation and access to supplies might be choked off. The sensory detail of such a night is striking. You touch the shutters of a chamber and feel their wood vibrating under the weight pressing from outside. Snow squeaks faintly as it shifts, a muffled groan echoing through the walls. The air grows damper, heavy with the scent of moisture, even though you are far from the storm itself. If you lean against the wall too long, you feel its chill sinking into your bones, colder than stone alone could make it. One unusual observation appears in the accounts of a Burgundian household. Children were sometimes sent to press their ears against shuttered windows to listen for the singing of the snow. The muffled hissing and creaking of drifts was said to foretell how long the storm would last. Whether playful or serious, the practice reflects how intimately people lived with winter's presence. Historians remain divided about whether snow accumulation improved or worsened castle life. Some argue that drifts against walls acted as natural insulation, like earthen banks, reducing the seep of icy wind. Others insist the dampness they brought only increased misery, leading to condensation, mold, and a heavier chill indoors. Archaeological evidence patches of water damage in lower chambers. Collapsed wooden lintels suggests both were possible. In some moments, snow became a blanket. In others, a crushing weight. Quirky measures were sometimes taken to adapt. In certain castles, shutters were deliberately propped open just a crack to allow servants to shovel snow away before it compacted. Elsewhere, people leaned boards or spare shields against exposed doors to deflect drifts. Imagine a guard stumbling through the night with frost on his beard, hammering planks across a door while the storm clawed at his cloak. His work meant someone inside would sleep without fear of waking trapped. There is a curious anecdote from a German chronicle about a blizzard so fierce that snow forced itself through keyholes and tiny cracks, scattering powder across chamber floors. Servants swept it away with rush brooms, muttering that winter had entered as a thief. The image is almost surreal, white drifts creeping silently into the very rooms meant to keep them out. The lived experience of sleeping in such conditions was precarious. You might settle beneath your blankets only to wake with the faint sound of creaking wood, realizing a shutter was bending inward under weight. Fear gnawed at the edges of rest. Would the barrier hold, or would snow break through, spilling across your bed like a ghostly tide? The anxiety lingered, even if nothing happened, making true rest rare. And yet, the snow could also bring reassurance. When piled against walls, it muffled sound, silencing the blizzard's scream into a soft hum. Imagine lying awake, at first startled by silence, then soothed as you realized the snow had wrapped the castle in its own frozen cocoon. The warmth inside may have been meager, but the quiet was priceless, a rare lullaby born of storm. Scholars still debate whether inhabitants regarded snowdrifts more with dread or with relief. Some letters describe the joy of feeling a room suddenly less drafty, as if the storm itself had lent insulation. Others complain bitterly of damp bedding, collapsed shutters, and the stench of mildew that followed. The answer, as so often, lies in circumstance. In some moments, the snow was an ally, in others, an enemy. You picture the keep at dawn after such a night. Doors on the ground level vanish beneath sculpted mounds, windows are hidden behind icy crusts, and chimneys puff faintly through white caps. Inside, people stir, rub their arms, and wonder whether they are prisoners of the storm or safe within its embrace. You step back from the shutter, trace a finger along the frost rimed on the wood, and realize that survival here was never simply about keeping snow out. It was about learning to live with it, embracing the paradox of a storm that both threatened and shielded, both chilled and muffled, both menaced and comforted. You descend from the battlements, brushing snow from your cloak, and step back into the castle's dim heart. The howling of the storm fades to a dull moan as you cross a corridor and enter a chamber faintly lit by oil lamps. Here, the air carries not only the smell of smoke and damp stone, but also the murmur of voices. Men and women kneel beside their beds or before small crucifixes, their lips moving in whispered words. Prayer before sleep was no small ritual in a medieval castle. On nights when blizzards clawed at shutters and darkness felt alive with danger, turning to God or saints, or charms was as essential as blankets and furs. Contemporary devotional texts urged Christians to recite prayers before bed, especially in winter when long nights were seen as perilous times for the soul. The bedtime prayer was as much a shield as any wall. Phrases like, "Lord, guard me through the night, deliver me from evil dreams," were muttered under heavy breaths while snow rattled on the roof. You can imagine a nobleman pulling his bed curtains shut, tracing the sign of the cross, and whispering words half to God and half to himself. Reassurance that morning would come, and that he would wake to see it. The ritual carried psychological weight. To sleep in such conditions meant surrendering control. Fires dwindled, servants nodded off, and the blizzard roared unchecked. Prayer provided comfort, a sense that higher powers kept watch when human eyes closed. For some, this assurance was as warming as fur. Unusual customs varied by region. In certain French households, people sprinkled holy water on bedding before lying down, believing it would repel both demons and disease. In Germany, small crosses of ash or chalk were drawn on shutters, intended to guard against frost spirits thought to slip through cracks. Imagine bending down with cold fingers, sketching a trembling cross on a window frame while icy air leaked in, convinced that mark would keep death itself outside. There is ongoing debate among scholars about how much these nightly devotions were acts of deep faith versus habits born of fear. Some argue that prayer reflected genuine spirituality, rooted in trust in God. Others emphasize the superstitious element rituals performed mechanically, half-believed, fueled by anxiety more than devotion. The truth likely sat somewhere between, for in the medieval mind, faith and fear often walk together. The sensory picture of such nights is powerful. You hear whispered Ave Marias mingling with the creak of wood under frost. The smell of incense lingers faintly where a censer burned earlier in the chapel, now clinging to clothes. Fingers trace rosary beads, the polished wood smooth against skin chapped by cold. Children mimic their parents' gestures, fumbling over words, while parents smile faintly, proud even in fatigue. One curious anecdote survives from a monastic chronicle. During a fierce storm, a group of monks reportedly sang psalms throughout the night, believing their voices kept demons of frost from entering the cloister. By morning, some had collapsed from exhaustion, yet the record praises their vigilance. Whether literally effective or not, the act shows how deeply prayer was intertwined with endurance. Yet, the practice was not limited to Christians. In border regions or households with mixed traditions, charms and folk incantations blended with formal prayers. A woman might murmur the Lord's Prayer, then tuck a sprig of rosemary under her pillow against the cold breath. Such mixtures reveal the pragmatic spirit of survival. No single method was dismissed if it might help. Historians remain divided on whether prayer truly calmed sleepers or whether fear persisted regardless. Did murmured words genuinely steady the heart, or were they only pauses before another hour of shivering wakefulness? Accounts are ambiguous. Some emphasize serenity, others nightmares despite devotion. The debate reflects how fragile sleep was in a storm, faith notwithstanding. You imagine yourself kneeling in the dim chamber. Your knees ache on cold stone. Your breath fogs as you whisper into cupped hands. The words are familiar, recited nightly, but tonight they feel heavier. Each gust rattling the shutter reminds you that stone is not invincible, that warmth is not assured. And so you cling to ritual, repeating phrases until your voice slows, eyelids droop, and you finally surrender to uncertain rest. As you lie down, the storm still rages, but the echo of prayer lingers like a blanket for the soul. Whether through divine presence or simple psychology, it brings peace enough to close your eyes. In a castle locked in winter's grip, that peace is as necessary as firewood and bread. The prayers fade into silence, and the castle seems to slumber, but not everyone has the luxury of sleep. Somewhere above, boots crunch steadily against snow. The midnight watch has begun. While others curl beneath firs or huddle together on rushes, guards climb to the ramparts, their cloaks whipping in the wind, their breath crystallizing in the air. If the castle is to survive the blizzard, someone must stay awake to keep the fires of vigilance burning. Medieval chronicles speak often of these night watches, particularly in winter when danger came not only from raiders but from the storm itself. Torches sputtered, lanterns hissed with melting ice, and sentries paced back and forth to keep blood flowing. The job was harsh, thankless, yet vital. A frozen guard could not raise the alarm, and a fire left untended could gutter into darkness. You can almost hear the scrape of boots on frost-bitten stone, the muffled curses of a man stamping his feet to keep warm. The sensory details are vivid. Imagine standing on the wall walk with snow pelting your face, the wind clawing through every seam of your cloak. The stone beneath your boots is slick with ice, and your fingers ache even inside leather gloves. In the distance, the howl of wolves carries across the whitened fields, mingling with the constant roar of the storm. You squint into the darkness, eyes watering from the cold, straining to see if that shifting shadow is an enemy or just snow piling against the gate. One curious practice mentioned in accounts is that guards sometimes carried heated stones wrapped in cloth inside their cloaks. These makeshift warmers offered temporary relief, though they cooled quickly in the gale. Others shared flasks of spiced wine, passing it hand to hand along the ramparts. The warmth was fleeting, but the ritual fostered camaraderie, binding men together against the hostile night. Not all historians agree on how rigorous these watches truly were. Some suggest that discipline was lax during storms after all. Who would attack a castle in a blizzard? Others argue that the cold demanded even stricter vigilance, since weakened defenders might invite disaster. The truth may lie in between. Some guards huddled half asleep by torches, while others marched tirelessly, knowing their lord's safety rested on their endurance. A peculiar anecdote survives from a northern English fortress. One sentry reportedly tied a rope around his waist and looped it to the battlements so that if he collapsed from exhaustion, he wouldn't fall into the snow below. His companions joked he looked like a tethered goat, but he survived storms that might have carried him to his death. Such ingenuity shows how far people went simply to endure the hours until dawn. Inside the castle, sleepers depended on these men. The guards' steady presence meant shutters were checked, fires stoked, doors cleared of drifting snow. Without them, the household might wake to smothered hearths and frozen passageways. Imagine servants stirring at first light, discovering the fire still alive thanks to a weary guard who refused to let embers die. That unseen labor shaped every person's sleep. The soundscape of a night watch is stark. You hear the crack of frost as wood contracts, the squeal of hinges as a lantern door opens, the heavy sigh of a man blowing warmth into numb hands. Occasionally, a horn call cuts through the storm, not because enemies approach, but to signal that the watch still holds. The blast echoes across frozen fields, reassuring those inside that vigilance continues. Scholars debate whether guards truly feared enemy raids during such storms, or if the real threat was nature itself. Some chronicles describe blizzards being used as cover for attacks, while others scoff at the idea, noting that armies too suffered in such weather. Yet even if no enemy lurked, the blizzard itself demanded respect. Snow could bury a gate, ice could split timbers, and vigilance was required to keep the fortress functional. Oddly enough, there are accounts of guards singing during the coldest nights. Low, droning chants kept spirits up and bodies moving. Imagine a line of men pacing along the wall, voices humming through scarves pulled tight, their song muffled but steady. To anyone awake below, the faint music drifting down might be both eerie and comforting, a reminder that not everyone was asleep, that someone still fought the cold on their behalf. For you, standing among them, the sensation is unforgettable. Your cheeks sting, your hands burn with numbness, your breath comes sharp and shallow. Yet the act of moving, of pacing with comrades, keeps you alive. Each step is defiance against the storm, each glance into the whiteness, a declaration that the castle will not be abandoned to the night. Inside, nobles and servants alike lie in uneasy warmth, unaware of every shiver endured above. But the watch continues, hour after hour, until at last the black sky begins to pale. Dawn creeps slowly over snow-laden battlements, and weary men descend, faces chapped and eyes hollow. They collapse by the fires they preserved, their bodies trembling from fatigue, yet proud. For without the midnight watch, no one in the castle would have slept at all. The storm does not relent. It batters the shutters, howls through the arrow slits, and moans inside the very stones of the keep. Yet inside, beneath blankets and furs, bodies drift into uneasy sleep. And what dreams they have! For in the Middle Ages, dreams were never just idle phantoms of the mind. They were seen as messages, warnings, prophecies, or sometimes invasions of the spirit world. On nights when snow buried the world outside, the dreams inside castles often centered on warmth, fire, or frightening cold. Writings from medieval physicians and theologians show how carefully dreams were considered. Some believed that the last food or drink consumed before bed shaped the night's visions. Heavy meats led to restless, feverish dreams, while lighter meals might bring calmer visions. Imagine falling asleep after a supper of venison, stew, and ale, only to dream of running endlessly through snow, pursued by unseen hunters. A scholar might later insist this was not random, but a reflection of humours boiling in the stomach. One curious record from a 14th century diary tells of a nobleman who dreamt during a blizzard that fire leapt from his hearth and spread across the hall. He woke terrified, certain it was an omen, and ordered guards to watch the fire more carefully that night. Whether coincidence or foresight, the hearth indeed smoked dangerously, and only quick action prevented disaster. Such tales reinforced the belief that dreams were warnings, not whims. But there's disagreement among modern historians about how seriously medieval people interpreted such nightly visions. Some argue they placed great stock in every detail, consulting clerics or dream books to decipher meanings. Others claim only the unusual or vivid dreams were considered significant, while most were dismissed as the result of indigestion or fatigue. The truth probably lay somewhere between. On ordinary nights, dreams were ignored, but on storm-racked nights when every sound felt ominous, they carried weight. Odd remedies were sometimes applied to influence dreams. A servant might tuck herbs like sage or mugwort under a pillow, hoping for pleasant visions. Others wore charms or small relics around their necks to ward off nightmares. Picture yourself lying in a curtained bed, clutching a tiny cross as snow rattles against the shutters, whispering a plea that no demon of frost creep into your sleep. The sensory world of such dreams is easy to imagine. You toss beneath blankets, your body hot from layers of wool but your nose stung by icy air. In your dream, firelight seems too bright, or snow seems endless, reflecting the storm outside. You hear phantom voices calling from the wind, and your heart races as though pursued. You wake with a start, gasping, only to realize the sound was real, the shutters groaning under weight. You clutch the blanket tighter, half convinced the dream is not finished. There's a curious anecdote in Icelandic sagas describing warriors who dreamt of frost giants pounding at their halls during blizzards. These visions were seen not merely as imagination but as glimpses of spirits embodying winter itself. In the Christianized castle world, such beings became demons or tempters, yet the imagery lingered. Even the devout might whisper that their nightmares had teeth, that they felt claws of cold even in sleep. Scholars remain divided on whether medieval people genuinely feared dreams as supernatural assaults or simply used them as metaphors. Did they truly believe a nightmare of freezing meant death was near, or was it simply the body's way of processing hunger, cold, and fatigue? The written sources can't agree, and so we are left with fragments, prayers, charms, and anxious notes scribbled in margins. In the shared sleeping quarters of servants, dreams became stories. Someone waking with a shout might recount visions of wolves howling in the snow, prompting others to murmur protective prayers. A child might whisper that angels gave her a candle to light her way through the storm, and companions would smile, taking comfort. These tales filled the hours before dawn, weaving the subconscious into the fabric of survival. You picture yourself now, lying in a canopy bed, drifting between wakefulness and slumber. The storm rages, your body is heavy with blankets, and your mind slips into visions. You dream of walking through halls filled with ice, torches frozen mid-flame, until suddenly you stumble upon a glowing hearth. Its warmth rushes over you, and you wake, breath fogging, cheeks chilled. The line between dream and reality is blurred, but the desire within both is the same, to find warmth in an unyielding winter. For the people of medieval castles, sleep was never simple rest. It was a negotiation with body, spirit, and imagination. And on blizzard nights, dreams themselves became battlegrounds between fear and hope, frost and fire, despair and faith. The dreams fade as dawn still hides beyond snow clouds, and you wander into another part of the fortress. Here the air feels different, colder, sharper, with a faint scent of wax and incense clinging to the stones. This is not the hall of nobles or the chamber of children. It is the dormitory of monks attached to the castle's chapel. If the great hall was noisy with coughs and snores, the dormitory is hushed, disciplined, bound by rules even in the midst of a blizzard. Monastic life followed a strict pattern, known as the rule, and it did not bend easily for weather. Monks rose at set hours to chant prayers, even when snowstorms howled through cloisters and frost glazed their sandals. The dormitories were often vast, shared spaces with rows of pallets or narrow beds, offering no privacy. Unlike nobles with curtained canopies, monks slept in communal austerity, their warmth coming from discipline and routine rather than furs. Contemporary accounts confirm that many monasteries had little or no heating in their dormitories. Fires were forbidden in sleeping areas, partly out of fear of sin, partly from fear of fire itself. Imagine lying down on a straw-filled mattress, cloaked in a coarse wool habit, while the wind found its way through shutter cracks. Your only comfort was the body heat of brothers lined up in rows beside you. Silence was enforced, so no murmured complaints or jokes softened the edge. You endured quietly, offering suffering as a form of devotion. One curious note survives from a Benedictine chronicle. Monks were instructed to sleep in their habits with belts fastened, ready to rise for night prayers without delay. The practicality is clear, less time lost to dressing in the cold. But the sensation must have been strange, cinched fabric pressing into your stomach even as you tried to rest, turning on your side, the buckle dug into your ribs, yet you did not dare loosen it. Discipline overrode comfort. There is disagreement among historians about how much this severity harmed health. Some argue that monks, accustomed to hardship, endured with little consequence. Others suggest that illnesses such as chronic coughs and rheumatism flourished precisely because of these cold dormitories. Excavated skeletons from monastic cemeteries show signs of joint disease and lung trouble, but whether caused by climate, diet, or lifestyle remains unsettled. A quirky practice appears in certain orders. Brothers sometimes warmed themselves briefly by braziers in the cloister before retiring, carrying that fleeting heat into bed. Others rubbed their hands with oil to guard against cracked skin. Imagine the scent of olive oil lingering on fingers clasped in prayer, mingling with the chill of wool sleeves. Such little gestures were acts of rebellion against the unrelenting cold. The sensory world of a monastic dormitory is austere. You hear the rustle of straw as bodies shift, the faint creak of wooden frames, the hiss of wind under the eaves. The air smells of wool, of incense carried in from the chapel, and faintly of damp stone. Your breath fogs above you, joining a cloud of mist rising from rows of sleepers. No fire flickers here. Darkness is complete once lamps are extinguished. If you wake in the night, you orient yourself not by light but by the sound of others breathing in unison. Oddly enough, some monastic texts describe dreams of warmth as temptations. A monk might confess to imagining a fire or soft furs, worrying that such longing revealed weakness. Surviving penance lists even included complaining of the cold as a fault requiring discipline. The idea was clear. Enduring winter without protest was a path to holiness. Whether or not every brother succeeded is another matter entirely. Yet scholars still debate the balance between practicality and spirituality in this approach. Were unheated dormitories truly expressions of religious devotion, or were they simply consequences of limited resources? Some argue the severity was deliberate, aligning with vows of poverty. Others point out that many monasteries were wealthy and could have afforded more comfort if they chose. The tension between choice and necessity remains unresolved. Imagine yourself lying in one of those rows. Your body aches against straw, your fingers stiff inside your habit sleeves. You long to roll closer to your neighbor, but silence holds you still. The wind groans through rafters, and snow ticks against shutters. In the darkness, you murmur a prayer, half to God, half to yourself, hoping it steadies your shivers. Sleep comes, but lightly, as you know the bell will soon toll for matins, dragging you from your bed into a chapel colder than the dormitory itself. For monks, survival during blizzards was not cushioned by tapestries or dogs at their feet. It was shaped by rhythm, ritual, and resignation. They endured not because they were warm, but because they believed endurance itself was holy. The disciplined hush of the monastic dormitory lingers in your ears as you step back into the storm-beaten corridors. Yet not all who lived within a castle's shadow had the benefit of stone walls and cloistered prayer. Beyond the keep, scattered around the bailey and fields, peasants and labourers struggled through blizzards in conditions even harsher. Their homes were not carved from stone but built of wattle and daub, timber frames packed with mud and straw, their roofs thatched, their floors bare earth. These people tilled the Lord's fields, tended animals, and supplied the castle with food. And at night, in the grip of winter, they too had to find ways to sleep and survive. Accounts from manorial records describe these cottages as cramped, smoky, and perpetually cold. Fires burned in open hearths at the centre of single-room huts, their smoke escaping through holes in the thatch. When snow fell heavily, drifts sometimes pressed against the outer walls, just as they did in castles. But here there were no thick tapestries to soften the chill. Families huddled together, livestock often penned indoors with them for warmth. Imagine lying down on straw while a cow shifted heavily nearby, its breath steaming in the darkness, its body heat welcome despite the smell. The sensory world is raw. The scent of dung mingles with the smoke of green wood. The floor is uneven, a patchwork of trampled straw and frozen mud. Children curl against their parents, wrapped in patched woolen tunics, sometimes covered with nothing more than cloaks worn during the day. Chickens flutter in rafters, disturbed by gusts that force snow through cracks in the walls. The blizzard outside does not respect boundaries, its voice whistles through every gap, rattling thatch and moaning like a restless spirit. One curious custom emerges in peasant households. People often placed heated stones or bricks directly into piles of straw where children slept, creating makeshift bed warmers. The stones were wrapped in cloth to prevent burns, much like in the noble chambers, but here the effect was shorter-lived. By midnight, the warmth had faded, and families drew tighter together. It is said in some villages that children fought for the place nearest the stone, while parents pretended not to notice, giving the youngest a chance to win. Scholars still argue about how dire these conditions were. Some point to archaeological evidence of soot-blackened walls and poor ventilation, suggesting constant illness from smoke and damp. Others highlight resilience, noting that shared space with animals and the insulating power of thatch sometimes kept cottages warmer than draughty stone halls. Was life in these huts miserable beyond measure, or simply another form of adaptation? The debate endures, fed by uneven evidence and the biases of medieval writers who often dismissed peasants as pitiable. Odd anecdotes pepper the record. One chronicler tells of a family who, during a fierce storm, slept in their barn atop hay bales, declaring it warmer than their house. Another describes villagers burying the lower walls of cottages with snow on purpose, using the drifts as insulation, a practice still echoed in some rural traditions centuries later. These stories blur the line between suffering and ingenuity. People who lived on the edge of survival found ways to turn hardship into makeshift shelter. You imagine lying down in such a space, pressed shoulder to shoulder with your family, a dog curled at your feet, the slow shifting of livestock, a lullaby of its own. Your body aches from labor, but fatigue drags you into sleep despite the cold. You dream of fire and bread, only to wake with frost on your blanket and the faint bleating of a sheep in the corner. For peasants, survival was collective. Unlike nobles who retreated to solas or monks bound by silent rules, peasants shared everything: heat, air, even space with their animals. Sleep was never private, never luxurious. It was simply another part of daily endurance, a nightly negotiation with the storm outside and the bodies within. Historians remain divided on whether such conditions shortened lives dramatically or whether communities adapted so well that they endured with remarkable toughness. Some evidence suggests high mortality during harsh winters, especially among infants. Others point to the continuity of peasant life across centuries as proof that their methods worked. The truth, as always, may be a mix. Survival for most, tragedy for some, endurance etched into the rhythm of every winter. As the storm roars beyond the thatch, you picture these families pressed together in the dark. Their laughter still rises sometimes. Even in misery, a joke about the cow snoring louder than father, or a child's giggle at the dog's wet nose. Humanity persists even in the coldest nights, and when dawn finally breaks, weak light filtering through smoke-stained rafters, they stir stiffly, shake frost from blankets, and return to labor. The castle may stand above them, grand and aloof, but in their cottages, peasants lived their own battles with the blizzard, won not with stone but with closeness, determination, and the warmth of one another. The cottages beyond the walls may be crowded and smoky, but inside the castle's chambers, another struggle unfolds, a battle not just against discomfort, but against sickness. Cold air creeping through cracks and damp clinging to stones did more than chill bones. It seeded coughs that lingered for weeks, fevers that stole strength, and ailments that frightened households during every long winter. Sleep was supposed to restore, yet in medieval castles, the night often carried illness instead. Medical writings of the era describe how physicians linked cold, damp air with bad humors. They believed chilled nights could imbalance the body, producing phlegm and weakness. Whether or not their theory was correct, the symptoms were real enough. Hacking coughs echoing through the hall, children waking with wheezing breaths, elders shivering beneath layers of blankets. Imagine trying to drift into slumber while the sound of someone coughing beside you never ceased, each rasp like a grim lullaby, reminding you of your own fragility. The sensory impression is vivid. The air smells faintly of mildew where snowmelt seeps through cracks. Damp straw releases a sour odor when bodies shift upon it. Breathing feels heavy, clogged, as if the air itself carries moisture into the lungs. In the dimness, you hear the rhythmic wheeze of a man struggling for breath, followed by the soft clink of a cup being lifted, herbal water, offered by a companion who hopes it might soothe. Odd customs developed to protect against such sickness. Some households burned juniper or rosemary in the hearth, believing the smoke would purify the air. Servants scattered dried herbs among the rushes, hoping to chase away miasma. Picture sitting by the fire while fragrant wood crackles, its resinous smoke mixing with the sharper tang of illness. It may not have cured, but it lifted spirits, convincing people that something was being done. There is disagreement among historians about how much colder castles truly contributed to widespread illness. Some argue that crowded sleeping quarters, poor hygiene, and smoky fires were the larger culprits. Others insist that drafts and dampness were central, making winter a season of fevers. Archaeological studies of bones reveal signs of chronic respiratory issues, but the causes remain contested. Was it smoke? Was it cold? Was it both? The debate continues. One curious anecdote comes from an English castle where the steward ordered extra blankets not for warmth, but to cover the coffers, as if smothering sound might prevent contagion. Another tale describes a nobleman who insisted on sleeping with a small brazier near his bed, convinced the constant heat would protect him from sickness. The brazier nearly suffocated him with smoke, but he survived the night, believing his method vindicated. The psychological toll was heavy. Imagine lying awake, throat scratchy, fearing the next bout of coughing will never end. Or worse, hearing your child stir beside you, their small body trembling with fever. In an age when medicine was rudimentary, nights filled with sickness carried dread. Rest became restless, every shadow a reminder of mortality. Quirky remedies abounded. People tied garlic cloves around their necks, rubbed goose fat on their chests, or placed warm cloths steeped in wine against their skin. These treatments may sound odd today, but in the biting cold of a castle night, any gesture of comfort, however eccentric, felt precious. Scholars remain divided on whether households truly believed these treatments cured or whether they served more as reassurance. Did garlic necklaces protect against spirits of frost, or were they merely symbolic shields? The evidence is uncertain, but the persistence of such remedies shows that faith in small rituals helped people endure what they could not fully control. You imagine yourself coughing in the darkness, blanket pulled to your chin, chest aching. A companion pats your back softly, whispering a prayer. The storm rattles outside, indifferent to your suffering. Yet in that small moment of human care, an herbal drink offered, a cloak spread across your shoulders, you find strength enough to close your eyes again. In a medieval castle, illness was as constant a companion as the cold itself. People did not sleep only against the storm, they slept against the spectre of fever, shivering in layers, hoping morning would bring recovery. For some, it did. For others, the night's chill proved too great. The coughs and wheezes echo through the stone corridors, but so too does the sound of footsteps, servants moving quietly, carrying bundles of dried leaves, roots, and powders. Illness, born of cold, demanded more than blankets and prayer. It called for remedies, drawn from the earth and prepared by hands both skilled and superstitious. In a medieval castle battered by blizzards, herbal medicine was the nighttime companion to wool and fire. Household records often mention storerooms stocked with sage, rosemary, thyme, and mint. These herbs were not only for cooking but for healing. Sage tea was believed to strengthen the chest against coughs. Rosemary boiled in water released fumes thought to clear lungs. Imagine a servant steeping a bundle in a steaming pot, the fragrance filling a chamber where patients lay huddled. The scent was sharp, bitter, yet strangely comforting, cutting through the staleness of smoke and damp. One curious custom involved hanging sprigs of rosemary above the bed, not just for its medicinal reputation, but because people believed it warded off evil spirits of sickness. Picture lying beneath such a sprig, its leaves crisping in the dry air, catching faint glimmers of firelight. Was it medicine, or was it magic? Perhaps both. Disagreement lingers among historians about how effective these treatments truly were. Some argue that many herbs did provide mild relief. Thyme, for instance, contains compounds with antibacterial properties. Others caution against projecting modern science backward, suggesting medieval remedies may have been more symbolic than curative. The debate underscores a larger truth. People sought any means to survive the cold, whether through practical healing or hopeful ritual. Odd recipes emerge from medical manuscripts. One recommends a poultice of onions, honey, and goose fat applied to the chest to ease breathing. Another suggests boiling sage with vinegar and inhaling the steam. Imagine the pungent cloud filling a small chamber, making your eyes water as you clutch a blanket tighter around you. The discomfort may have been intense, but so too was the belief that it pushed sickness out. The sensory world of these remedies is striking. You hear the clatter of pestles grinding herbs in stone mortars, the hiss of pots bubbling over flames, the sharp crack of dried stems being broken. You smell mint sharp as winter air, garlic pungent and earthy, honey sweet but sticky on fingers. You feel the heat of compresses laid against the chest, the roughness of woolen cloths soaked in vinegar. Healing was tactile, fragrant, noisy. One anecdote tells of a noblewoman who insisted her chamber be filled with burning juniper branches during storms, convinced the smoke not only warmed, but sterilized the air. Servants complained of choking, yet she slept soundly, soothed by the scent. Another tale speaks of a healer in a castle town who placed crushed ivy leaves inside boots, claiming they would draw out frost from the feet. Whether placebo or miracle, those who tried it often swore they felt relief. Scholars still puzzle over whether such remedies were believed wholeheartedly or accepted with a degree of skepticism. Did patients truly trust goose fat to cure a fever, or did they simply grasp at whatever hope was offered? Surviving letters suggest both. Some proclaim miraculous recovery after herbal treatment, others mourn that nothing availed. But even failure did not end the practice, because in the cold, doing something felt better than doing nothing. You picture yourself in a chamber where illness lingers. A servant hands you a steaming cup, its surface shimmering with floating sage leaves. You sip, the taste bitter but grounding, warmth spreading through your chest. A sprig of rosemary dangles above the bed, its shadow dancing on the wall. You hear others cough in the darkness, but you cling to the belief that the potion in your stomach is fighting back. Sleep comes, not peaceful but tinged with hope. In the blizzard-locked castle, herbs were the bridge between faith and survival. They could not banish winter, but they gave people tools to fight it, scents to comfort the sick, and rituals to steady the fearful. Against stone walls and icy draughts, they were as much part of the night's defense as fire or fur. The smell of herbs fades, replaced by quieter sounds, muffled cries, whispered prayers, and the shuffle of servants carrying water basins. For all the dangers of cold and cough, nothing tested the resilience of a medieval household more than childbirth in the dead of winter. Imagine the blizzard raging outside, snow piling high against the keep, while inside, a woman labors through the night. Her family and attendants gathered around in anxious vigil. Sleep for them was impossible. The storm and the birth became intertwined, both elemental forces beyond control. Contemporary chronicles often mention the hazards of winter births. Infants were especially vulnerable to the cold, their tiny bodies unable to regulate heat. Mothers, weakened by blood loss and exhaustion, faced a deadly combination of chill and infection. Accounts describe fires blazing fiercely in birthing chambers, servants hurrying to keep water warm, and every fur in the household dragged out to swaddle mother and child. Yet even with these efforts, survival was uncertain. The sensory details are vivid. The room smells of smoke and sweat, of damp cloths and burning resin tossed onto the fire to sweeten the air. You hear the howl of the storm outside, counterpointed by the groans of labor. The rushes beneath your feet are wet with spilled water and scattered herbs. Candles gutter in the draughts, their flames bending as if sharing the woman's pain. Odd practices were part of this scene. Some midwives recommended placing heated stones wrapped in linen near the bed, hoping their warmth would guard against shock. Others draped the newborn in wool immediately, often before the umbilical cord was cut, so that no breath of cold touched bare skin. A few manuscripts even advise filling shoes with hot ashes and placing them beside the bed as makeshift radiators. To modern ears, these solutions sound strange, but in a castle locked in ice, any warmth was precious. There's disagreement among historians about how effective these measures were. Some argue that the extra heat made real differences, reducing the risk of hypothermia. Others point out the dangers smoke inhalation, burns, contamination that may have worsened outcomes. Surviving statistics are grim. Infant mortality in winter months was higher, though whether due to cold or other seasonal factors remains debated. Curious anecdotes illustrate the desperation. A 15th century account from Burgundy tells of a midwife who insisted a mother hold a piece of iron in her hand during labor to draw strength from the earth. Another tale describes women chanting protective verses over the ancient crib while snow battered the shutters, convinced that words could keep frost spirits from stealing the child's breath. Faith, ritual, and practicality blended seamlessly in such moments. The sensory picture deepens. You cradle a newborn wrapped in wool, its breath shallow, its skin flushed by the heat of the fire. The air tastes thick with smoke. Your eyes sting, but you don't dare move farther from the flames. Outside, wind shrieks like a banshee, but inside, all attention fixes on the fragile bundle. The mother, pale and trembling, is swaddled in blankets, hands clutching a cup of hot broth. Everyone else, midwives, servants, family, hover in exhausted silence, listening for the infant's cries. Not all scholars agree on how widespread these elaborate birthing rituals were within castles versus peasant homes. Some argue noble women had far greater access to midwives, herbs, and heated chambers, while commoners endured harsher conditions with little aid. Others suggest that even in simple cottages, neighbors rallied to bring warmth, furs, and hands to help. The evidence shows variation, but a shared theme. Community rallied against the coldest and most dangerous nights. And there are stories of triumph. One letter from an English nobleman describes the relief of hearing his child's first cry above the storm's roar, as if the baby's voice itself silenced winter's fury. For that family, the blizzard became part of the child's legend, proof that they were born strong enough to defy the elements. Imagine yourself in that chamber, sitting beside the bed as the storm rages. Your heart pounds as you hear the baby wail. Your shoulders sag with relief. The fire blazes. The room is sweltering despite the drafts. And for a fleeting moment, joy triumphs over frost. Yet you know the struggle is not finished. Through the night, blankets must be adjusted, broth must be served, fire must be fed. Everyone remains vigilant. For in a medieval castle, childbirth during a blizzard was not only a moment of life, it was a night-long fight against death. The cries of newborns fade into the deeper hum of the storm, and as you wander further into the keep, you notice another sound, the low rumble of hooves, the muffled snorts of animals bedding down. You've reached the castle stables. During blizzards, these spaces became strange refuges, not only for horses and livestock, but sometimes for people who preferred the heat of beasts to the chill of empty chambers. Survival did not always smell of herbs or smoke. It sometimes smelled of hay, sweat, and manure. Medieval accounts confirm the practice. Horses, oxen, and cows radiated remarkable warmth, enough to transform stables into rough shelters against the cold. In some desperate winters, servants or guards dragged pallets of straw into corners of the stable, curling up beside the flanks of animals. Imagine pressing your back against the body of a horse, feeling it shift and sigh, its heat seeping into your bones. The comfort was visceral, if not exactly fragrant. The sensory impression is intense. The air is thick with the sweet-sour smell of hay, mingled with manure and the sharp tang of leather tack. You hear the steady chew of animals working through their fodder, the stamp of hooves, the jingle of harness buckles. When the wind rattles the stable doors, the beasts shift nervously, but their warmth remains steady. Lying in that space, your skin prickles with heat on one side and chill on the other, an imperfect balance, but one that might mean survival. One curious custom is noted in Scandinavian folklore. Children were sometimes laid to sleep in cradles suspended above stabled animals, hung from rafters so that rising body heat kept them warm. Picture a cradle swaying gently, hay rustling below, the baby's breath clouding faintly in the air but never freezing. It may sound rustic, but ingenuity often trumped elegance when blizzards struck. Historians disagree on how common such practices were inside stone castles. Some argue that nobles would have considered it beneath their dignity to sleep among beasts. Others counter that in moments of desperation, pride yielded to pragmatism after all. Warmth was warmth, no matter the source. Archaeological traces of straw bedding found near stable walls suggest humans did indeed sleep there at times, though whether nobles or only lower servants remains contested. Odd anecdotes appear in chronicles. One story tells of a squire who chose to spend the night in the stables during a storm, only to wake with his hair frozen into the mane of a horse he had cuddled against. Another describes guards on rotation sleeping between two oxen, joking that they were warmer than wives. Humour, even coarse, softened the hardship of sharing a bed with livestock. There is also debate about health risks. Some scholars argue that stable air, heavy with ammonia from waste, was dangerous for long exposure. Others suggest it was no worse than smoky chambers filled with humans. Either way, the evidence shows that people accepted the trade-off. Better to risk foul air than certain frostbite. Imagine yourself curling up on a straw pallet in the corner of a stable. The rough stalks poke at your skin, dust tickles your nose, but as a cow settles beside you, warmth spreads through the air. The storm rattles outside, but inside the stable there is a different rhythm. Animals breathing, chewing, shifting. You fall asleep not to silence, but to the heartbeat of creatures sharing their heat. It is not noble, not elegant, but it is survival. Quirky practices even extended to ritual. In some rural traditions, people whispered blessings over animals before bedding down beside them, thanking them for their warmth as though it were a gift. Others left scraps of bread near the trough as offerings, a way to honor beasts that kept humans alive. The blurred line between gratitude and superstition reflected the dependence people felt toward their animals. Scholars continue to argue over whether these stories represent regular practice or emergency measures reserved for the harshest nights. Yet the persistence of such accounts suggests they were neither rare nor shameful. In a world where firewood was scarce and storms unrelenting, barns and stables were more than utility, they were lifelines. The storm still howls outside, but in the stable the air grows heavy with heat and scent. You close your eyes, pressed between hay and the steady flank of an ox. Sleep comes more easily than you expect, for in the medieval night, survival often meant setting aside distinctions of rank and refinement, accepting warmth wherever it could be found, even if it meant falling asleep with your cheek against the hide of a horse. The stables are warm in their earthy way, but you step back into the keep, where the storm still gnaws at every seam. You move into another chamber, dimly lit by flickering rushlights, and notice families or groups of retainers spreading themselves across the floor in clusters. Here, survival depends less on fire or beasts and more on bodies pressed together. Communal sleeping, the practice of sharing warmth through proximity, was one of the oldest and simplest ways to outlast the night in a castle under blizzard siege. Medieval sources mention it frequently. Peasants in cottages slept shoulder to shoulder. Nobles often shared beds with companions on journeys, and even soldiers in barracks arranged themselves like spoons in a drawer. The castle was no exception. In its vast but draughty halls, grouping together turned scattered warmth into a shared reservoir. Imagine lying on straw or rushes, your back pressed to another's spine, the heat of breath moist against your neck. It was intimate, not in romance, but in necessity. The sensory world is vivid. Woolen cloaks overlap like patchwork quilts. Feet jostle against each other, and elbows poke as people shift in sleep. The air grows humid with combined breath, the smell of sweat mingling with smoke and wet wool. Yet, despite the discomfort, there is relief. Alone, you might shiver endlessly. Together, you feel a cocoon of warmth building hour by hour. One curious tidbit appears in a 14th century household account. Retainers were instructed to rotate positions through the night, ensuring no one stayed on the draft, exposed edge for too long. Picture a row of men turning like a human chain, groaning and muttering as they rearrange themselves, but accepting the system as fair. Historians still debate how common bed-sharing was among nobles compared to servants. Some insist noble families fiercely guarded their privacy, retreating behind curtains. Others argue that even lords occasionally shared, particularly while traveling or during sieges when space and fuel were scarce. Letters survive describing noblemen complaining about cramped beds on journeys, which suggests the practice was at least situational. Odd customs surrounded communal sleeping. In some places, children were deliberately placed in the middle of the group, their small bodies shielded by the heat of parents or older siblings. In other households, dogs slipped in between sleepers, tolerated because every degree of warmth mattered. One tale from a German castle tells of a guard sneaking into the great hall to wedge himself between two huddled groups of servants, grumbling that honor is colder than humility. His fellows laughed, but they let him stay. There is disagreement among scholars about whether people thought of this closeness as shameful or ordinary. Some argue that chronicler's silence reflects embarrassment, that intimacy of this kind was not spoken of openly. Others counter that it was so common as to be unremarkable, a simple fact of winter life not worth special note. The debate remains unresolved, but the image of clustered bodies emerges again and again in descriptions of medieval winters. The sensory impression deepens. You feel the scratch of another's cloak against your face, hear the wheeze of an elder, and the soft whimper of a child in dreams. The storm outside seems distant now, muffled by the chorus of human breathing. Heat builds slowly, until sweat beads at your temples, even while your toes remain cold. It is an odd balance, part warmth, part discomfort, but it keeps you alive. One quirky anecdote tells of a French household that developed a chant sung softly before sleep, not as prayer but as a rhythm to calm and coordinate the group. Lie close, lie still, lie through the storm, the refrain went, echoing like a lullaby. Whether apocryphal or not, the story conveys the way companionship was turned into ritual. Scholars remain divided on whether such communal habits reduced illness or worsened it. Some suggest close quarters spread coughs more rapidly. Others argue the shared heat reduced deaths from hypothermia, outweighing risks. Both positions hold merit, reminding us that every method of survival carried its own trade-offs. Imagine yourself now, wedged between companions, cloak pulled tight around all of you. At first you resent the weight, the lack of space. But as hours pass, you notice the storm's bite soften. The curtain of bodies blocks, drafts, their warmth seeping into you. You close your eyes, lulled by the rhythm of shared breath. In this living quilt, you realize the castle has found its simplest, most ancient defense against the cold. Not stone, not fire, but human closeness. The chamber of clustered sleepers grows thick with the heat of bodies, but you step away into another part of the keep. Here, the air changes again warmer, scented faintly of meat, bread, and melted fat. You've reached the kitchen and adjoining buttery, where survival against the blizzard takes on a different form. For while most of the castle freezes in drafts and smoke, the kitchen remains alive with heat, light, and food. It is here that some found their refuge, curling on benches or near ovens to snatch a warmer sleep than any noble canopy could offer. Medieval kitchens were the engines of the household. Large hearths roared not only for cooking but for baking, boiling, and brewing. In winter storms, these fires rarely went out. To do so would be disastrous, requiring hours to rekindle flames sufficient to feed a castle. Servants rotated through the night to tend embers, making the kitchen one of the few places where warmth endured around the clock. Imagine stepping inside. After wandering through icy corridors, your cheeks sting with sudden heat, your eyes water from smoke, and your fingers thaw painfully near the flames. The sensory world here is vivid. Fat spits on the fire, filling the air with savory tang. Wooden bowls clatter as they are stacked, knives scrape against boards, and the constant hiss of boiling pots provides background rhythm. Rushlights flicker, casting long shadows against soot-blackened walls. Beneath it all lingers the warmth itself, not steady and gentle, but fierce and immediate. heat radiating from stone ovens and iron cauldrons. One curious custom recorded in household accounts was allowing children and the sick to sleep in the kitchen during blizzards. Straw pallets were spread near ovens, where warmth lasted longest. Picture a row of children curled like kittens by the fire, their cheeks rosy from heat, while outside snow lashed the towers. It was not luxurious smoke stung the eyes, and the air grew stifling, but it kept frostbite at bay. Historians disagree on how widely kitchens doubled as sleeping quarters. Some argue it was only emergency practice, since cooks guarded their domain jealously. Others suggest it was routine for lower servants, who lacked beds elsewhere, and seized any warm corner available. Archaeological traces of ash mixed with straw in kitchen layers hint that human bodies often rested here, even if chronicles kept silent about the indignity. Odd anecdotes illustrate this vividly. One tale from a Burgundian castle describes a scullion who slept too close to the oven door and woke with singed hair. Another mentions a cook so exhausted during a storm that she nodded off against a cauldron and nearly tipped it over. Such accidents became part of the folklore of winter survival, retold with laughter after the storms passed. The debate among scholars continues. Were these kitchens havens of relief, or simply smoky, choking chambers that traded cold misery for suffocating warmth? Some argue the latter, citing complaints about the stinking air of kitchens in manorial letters. Others insist that when blizzards howled, any warmth was preferable to icy drafts. Likely, both views are true depending on circumstance. Comfort to some, discomfort to others, but always a lifeline in winter. The sensory impression deepens. You lie down on straw in a corner, your back warmed by the stone oven, your nose filled with the smell of roasted meat that clings even after pots are emptied. You hear the drip of fat hitting coals, the crack of logs, the sleepy murmur of a servant tending embers. The storm still rages beyond the shutters, but here you feel wrapped in fire's embrace, lulled by the rhythm of hearth and pot. Curiously, some kitchens were also places of ritual. Cooks sometimes marked oven doors with protective symbols, believing the fire itself needed blessing to withstand storms. Others placed salt in corners, convinced it warded off evil spirits carried by winter winds. These gestures reveal how intimately kitchens were linked not only to nourishment, but to survival at the edge of belief. You imagine the dawn after such a night. While others stumble from freezing chambers, you rise from the kitchen corner, almost warm, hair scented with smoke, body sticky with grease. It is not clean or noble, but you are alive, which in a blizzard is victory enough. In the frozen heart of a castle, the kitchen was more than a workplace. It was a hearth for the whole household, a sanctuary of fire and food where survival was cooked nightly into bread, broth, and the glowing coals that outlasted the storm. The kitchens fade behind you, their warmth lingering faintly on your skin as you step into yet another chamber. This one is quiet, almost eerily so. The walls are lined with shelves of manuscripts, wax tablets, and precious scrolls. The air smells of parchment and ink. You've entered the castle's library or scriptorium, a place of learning and silence. Yet even here, in this realm of words, the struggle with the blizzard seeps in. For how could one sleep, how could one preserve thought, when snow hammered at shutters and frost crept across the very ink? Medieval libraries were not cozy retreats but austere spaces. They were often unheated, for fire posed too great a risk to fragile books. Scribes worked in their cloisters, bundled in cloaks and gloves, sometimes with small holes cut in the fingertips to hold quills. At night, when the storm pressed hardest, these chambers became forbidding. Imagine lying down on a bench here, your breath fogging above shelves of sacred texts, the cold biting harder because no hearth dared be lit. Yet some did choose this space, especially scholars or clerics who felt words were a stronger comfort than blankets. The sensory details are sharp. You smell dry vellum, a faint tang of ink, and the mustiness of old wood. Your ears catch the creak of shelves as the cold contracts them, the faint rattle of snow against shutters. Your fingers trace a page, the surface stiff and chilly, as if the parchment itself had frozen. To sleep in such a place was less about warmth and more about a certain kind of devotion, the belief that guarding knowledge was worth discomfort. One curious tidbit from a 13th century chronicle describes monks in northern France placing heated bricks beneath their desks to warm their feet while copying texts. If those bricks remained hot, they sometimes brought them to their palates at night. It blurs the line between study and survival, as if scholarship and warmth shared the same tools. Historians disagree about whether libraries were ever intentionally used as sleeping spaces. Some argue it was unlikely, given the risk to manuscripts from fire or moisture. Others counter that desperate winters drove people to sleep wherever there was room, and that scribes working late may have simply collapsed on benches rather than brave, colder dormitories. Archaeological finds of soot near shelving hint at hidden braziers once used despite prohibitions. The debate continues, unresolved but tantalizing. Odd anecdotes bring the scene alive. One tale from Burgundy tells of a scribe who tucked pages of rejected drafts under his cloak as insulation, joking he had found warmth in words. Another describes a scholar who claimed to dream of angels teaching him theology whenever he slept in the library during storms, visions perhaps born more of chill than divine revelation. The sensory reality is haunting. You picture yourself curled in a corner, wrapped in a wool cloak, the flicker of a lamp casting pale light on spines of books. Your nose aches from the cold, yet you breathe in the papery scent, strangely comforted. Outside the storm bellows, but here the silence feels deeper, almost sacred. You sleep fitfully, not warm but soothed by the presence of human thought captured in ink. Scholars still debate whether these libraries truly shielded their inhabitants from winter or only magnified it. Were they sanctuaries of the mind that distracted from the body's misery, or were they miserable places where even words froze on the page? The evidence points in both directions, depending on the wealth of the collection and the architecture around it. Yet even in the cold, libraries symbolized resistance. To keep knowledge alive during storms was to insist that winter could not silence human voices. In that sense, sleeping in a library was more than a practical choice. It was a gesture of faith in endurance. Imagine yourself rising at dawn from such a chamber. Your limbs are stiff, your lips cracked, but you gaze at shelves of manuscripts and feel something beyond cold: pride. The castle may groan beneath the snow, but within these walls, thought has survived the night, and so have you. You step out of the scriptorium, the scent of ink and parchment still clinging faintly to your cloak, and wander through the castle one final time. The blizzard outside has not quieted it, still claws at shutters, rattles doors, and presses its white weight against every tower, but inside, the fortress holds steady. Every chamber tells its story. The noble's canopy bed lined with fur, the servants huddled in corners, the children bundled in wool, the dogs pressed close, the monks in their cold dormitories, the peasants in their cottages beyond the walls. Each strategy, each ritual, each whispered prayer was another thread in the great tapestry of survival. Stone walls alone were never enough. Castles were not warm havens but draughty bulwarks, protective against blades yet vulnerable to winter's bite. People adapted with fire, with cloth, with animals, with closeness. They accepted discomfort as a fact of life, transforming hardship into nightly routines. To sleep in a medieval castle during a blizzard was not about peace or comfort, it was about endurance. And endurance came in many forms, sometimes in a steaming cup of spiced ale, sometimes in the silent faith of a prayer, sometimes in the rough warmth of a dog against your feet. The sensory memories linger as you retrace your steps: smoke that stings the eyes, the scratch of wool against the skin, the earthy musk of stables, the soft rasp of coughs in the dark. You recall the flicker of rushlights, the sigh of the wind through hidden passages, the press of another's body in communal sleep. These details are the heartbeat of the medieval night, pulsing beneath layers of stone and snow. Unusual practices reveal their own charm. Heated stones wrapped in cabbage leaves, infants rocked in cradles suspended above animals, herbal sprigs tucked into bed curtains to chase away both frost and demons. Such eccentricities remind you that medieval survival was as inventive as it was desperate. People never stopped looking for ways to turn the cold aside, even if it meant bending logic towards superstition. Historians, of course, remain divided on the effectiveness of it all. Some argue castles were unbearably frigid, their inhabitants perpetually miserable. Others claim that through layers of wool, furs, and clever tricks, life inside was tolerable, even comfortable by the standards of the age. The truth may lie somewhere in between, neither cozy sanctuary nor frozen tomb, but a place where survival was always possible, though never easy. And as you imagine the castle through one more stormy night, you see its resilience. Fires gutter, then are stoked again. Families draw closer. Voices murmur prayers. Dogs shift and sigh. Monks wake to chant in icy chapels. Guards stamp their feet on the ramparts. Each person plays a role. Each body adds its warmth to the whole. The blizzard may scream, but the castle answers not with defiance, nor with surrender, but with quiet persistence. Now, dim the lights. Let the storm soften into background murmur. The way wind becomes lullaby once you accept it cannot be fought. Picture yourself wrapped in a cloak, straw beneath you, a faint embers glow on the wall. The castle breathes around you, stones settling, sleepers murmuring, animals shifting in stables. The night is long, but not endless. Morning will come. And when it does, you will rise, stiff and smoky, but alive, stepping out into a world muffled by snow and shining under the pale winter Sunday. For now, close your eyes. Drift with the echo of centuries, carried on the same winds that rattled shutters long ago. The storm may rage, but you are not alone. You share warmth with the countless souls who, through ingenuity and stubbornness, learned to sleep in stone fortresses while winter beat its fists against the walls. Rest in their company. Let the cold remain outside, and let your dreams be steady, like the heartbeat of the castle itself. And now, the story quiets. The castle's blizzard fades into memory, its draughts and fires settling into silence. You are no longer wandering corridors or pressing your hand to icy stone. You are simply lying here, in your own room, your own safe place. The voices of guards, servants, monks, and nobles recede like echoes down long stone halls, leaving only calm behind. Take a slow breath. Imagine the snow outside falling more gently now, no longer a storm but a soft veil drifting through the night. Picture yourself safe inside, wrapped in layers not of wool or fur but of rest itself. The cold cannot reach you here. The wind that once rattled shutters has become nothing more than a whisper. Every hardship you heard about coughs in the dark, damp straw, smoke in the eyes slips further away, until they are only distant images, softened like candlelight fading in a chapel. What remains is the warmth of survival, the knowledge that people endured even the harshest winters, and so too can you endure your own night. Feel your body sinking deeper into the mattress, heavier with calm. Each muscle loosens as though you are laying aside the armor of the day. The storm has no claim on you. The castle's burdens are past, and all that is left is peace. Let your thoughts drift like snowflakes, slowly, gently, each one settling until stillness surrounds you. You are safe. You are warm. The story has carried you through stone walls and icy corridors, but now it brings you here to rest, to quiet, to dreams. Sleep well, traveller. Tomorrow will come, bright and new. For now, surrender to the night, and let the hush of history lull you into slumber.